this closed session was limited to discussion regarding enterprise risk management quarterly update, corporate officer performance review, and compensation adjustments for Vice Presidents Kate Brown, Javier Fernandez, Mary Fisher, and Mark Sedgwick. No votes or other board action were taken during this closed session. Okay.
You're going to take a break?
Yep. We sort of took our break at a time.
Well,
so-
some of us did.
Some of us did, so we can take a break.
We still had
Yeah, take a break.
Or we can invite people in, right?
Yeah, we can
I
invite people
ready
in.
just didn't know if you wanted to pause that for a
Do you
minute.
want to pause?
No, we're good.
No, I think we're good to just let people in.
Good.
Let people come on and ready. Yeah, come on. Yeah. Okay. Welcome. Earlier, before the closed session, I made the announcement regarding public notice of this meeting. Today, we will hear the following committee reports. Finance, Tim Gay. Systems Management and Nuclear Oversight, Rick Yoder. Public Information, Craig Moody. Governance, Mike Kavanaugh. Tim Burke will now give the safety briefing.
Here in the conference room on 9 West and Energy Plaza. Right behind you is a fire extinguisher. If we need to exit this room in the event of a fire, we would not use the elevators. We would take the steps to the left of the elevators and go all the way down to the main level and exit out on the 17th Street side of the building. We don't anticipate any severe weather, but if that was the case, we could take the elevator down to the main area, and we would be escorted into the call center, which is a secured area for severe weather. The AED and the first aid kit are to the right of the elevators, one on top of the other. Is anybody here certified in the use of an AED or in CPR? So very good, thank you very much for that. If you have a medical condition, if you could write it down or tell your neighbor. We have somebody called 911 in the event that we need it. Mark, if you would do that, that would be great. Thank you very much. And the restrooms for all of those here are down at the end of this hall to my right, women's to the left, and men's straight ahead. So with that, that concludes my safety briefing.
Thank you very much, President Burke. We'll now have the finance report. Mr. Gay.
All right, thank you, Ann. There's about four things we've got to discuss. Finance Committee did not have a finance meeting, just with last month's long. A lot of things going on last month. We heard the corporate operating report last month, and yet Thanksgiving sneak in there, so I didn't get a chance to call a meeting. I apologize for anyone that wanted one and didn't get one. So anyway, but so we have we'll go over our November financial report. Javier will talk a little bit on the corporate operating plan, and I'm sure there may be questions on that. You've all had a chance to review it for the last month. So if there's any updates, he will give us those, and you can ask questions on that. That is an action item, of course, we're going to vote on Thursday. And then the expenditures we had talked about as well, too. The fund performance is retirement funds that he will talk about. So I'll turn it over to Javier Fernandez. I'll walk us through this, Javier.
Thank you, Director Gay. Pleasure again to report on the November financials. This is what a CFO is typically waiting for a month like November. It's a boring month. Throughout the year, it hasn't been a great year in the market, and I've been talking about these power purchases that have exceeded our budget. Same with off-system sales revenues that have exceeded the budget. This time around in November, it was actually pretty accurate. Our off-system sales and power purchases were pretty much in line with expectations. So that basically made the November financial report a little bit dull. But I'm still gonna go through it. So reporting on retail revenues for November were $70.5 million, which is $1.9 million over budget. Relatively small variation over budget considering the amount of retail revenues. Off-system sales were $12.4 million, which is just $1 million over budget. When I say just as a reminder, we've seen in previous months sometimes $8-10 million over budget. This time around was just $1 million over budget on off-system sales revenues. Other income for November was $4.7 million, which is $2.2 million under budget. In November, interest rates increased as opposed to what we've been seeing all throughout the year, where interest rates have declined. In November, we did see a little increase in interest rates, which has had the effect of lowering our other income for the mark-to-market of securities. It is interesting for me to say that because we were in the market pricing bonds at the end of October, if you remember that transaction, and I try never to look back, but in this case it's nice to know that we issued bonds at one of the lowest points in the market, and interest rates have gone up since. So a little bit of fortune here for OPPD on our timing of issuing bonds. Operating and maintenance expenses, excluding fuel and purchase power for November, were $28.2 million, which is $1 million under budget. Staying within our budgets, I think that's a testament to the discipline that this organization has. Fuel and purchase power expenses for November were $26.9 million, which is $400,000 over budget. This is the other side of the coin, where we have seen fuel and purchase power expenditures sometimes in excess of $10 million over budget per month. This time we were right on track, just $400,000 under budget. That's contributing to the positive results in November. Other expenses for November were $32.9 million, $100,000 over budget, very, very close to budget. This brings us to a net income for November of a loss of $400,000, which is $1.2 million larger than what we expected in the budget. So all in all, a positive month. I think this is something where we're certainly looking close to December, and these last 2 months of the year will determine really how we close the year. Something I want to talk about in a little bit more detail. Capital expenditures for November were $15.6 million, which is $4.4 million over budget. If you remember, earlier in the year, we were trailing behind budget on capital. Flooding events didn't really help. A lot of the work had to be delayed, and the teams have been doing fantastic work in Kate's area and Mary Fisher's area and Troy's area. They've been doing really, really well, picking up work, trying to finish as many projects as we can on the capital side, and this is reflected in here. $4.4 million over budget in November to bring us close to the annual budget. Year to date, on the capital side, we are at $173 million, which is only $18 million under budget. And I say only because by now, in years past, we've been trailing anywhere between $25 and $30 million under budget. Now it's only 18, and I have a high degree of confidence that we may end up in the below $10 million of under budget expenses for capital, which is great. This means that we are completing the capital projects that we said to do at the beginning of the year. It's not by accident, it's by a lot of dedication from the teams, project management, trying to get things done on time. The unrestricted cash balance at the end of November was $375.3 million, which is $60.5 million under budget. This is still showing the accumulation of expenses, of purchase power expenditures that we've had throughout the year, that we've used some of our cash to finance that. The net income for 2019 is budgeted at $77.6 million. We should end up in the year a little bit under that amount, but not significantly under.
Javier, what was the reason in October we had the dip in available cash?
Oh, great question. So if you look at your graph, there's a graph on page 6 that shows the dip in cash balances.
Did we move money for something, or what was it?
Great question. So what happened in here, if you remember the cash defeasance that we had to do, the new tax law doesn't allow us to do advance refundings of our debt anymore. So what we do here, we have to do this in 2 separate transactions. In October, we used cash, $170 million of our cash, to pay off debt. We have to wait 15 days before we issue new debt to reimburse ourselves. The issuance of the new debt happened on November 9th. The use of cash happened mid-October. So you see this temporary dip in cash that was therefore restored by the issuance of new debt in November. But great question.
Okay, I couldn't remember what it was. Short term.
I wanna use take a moment just to give kudos to the accounting team who's done fantastically well this year. We had a 3-day close in November. The calendar worked in such that we had to close the books in a limited amount of time. Not only did we do that, but we did that at the same time as we added Schultz Wind Farm, which came online in November. So integrating all of that and the accounting of that it's a huge undertaking, and we were able to accumulate all of that in 3 days. So it's a public recognition of the accounting team and energy marketing and trading and the power folks incorporating this big operation into our financials. So with that, I conclude the report. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions on that? One thing, Javier, can you refresh my memory and everyone else's, the plan going into next year on how we're gonna look at these reports, timing wise and all that? How's it gonna look when we come back in January, February, March? What do we end up? Yeah.
Thank you. So let me start by January. January is always an interesting, a different month. In January, we typically don't have December financials, because it's when we have our audited financial statement process. So January, typically, I take a mini break from committee meetings because we don't have financials to report. That will still be the case in January of 2020. Going forward, what I've discussed with the finance committee and the subcommittee, and I think we've discussed the idea here at the committee meeting, is that these type of in-depth financial report will happen on a quarterly basis. And the reason for that is there's a lot that happens in between months that it's not as relevant as for me to report on a quarterly basis. How are we doing? And so the idea is to bring a quarterly report to the board where I would go through in more detail our operations, what's happened, really trends, more actionable items on trends on revenues, expenditures, capital, And then on a monthly basis, you will still get your, the monthly financial and operations report, the F&O report. You will get a dashboard with virtually the same information you have in here, but it'll be a dashboard for your consumption. If there's anything of note to report on a month, on an in-between month, that it's not a quarter month, I will bring it up to your attention. But the plan is not to use these committee time to go through the monthly report in such detail, but rather wait for these on a quarterly basis, but still provide you with the monthly information on the dashboard.
So that will be in the board and the
the
director's
director's
update, all right?
It'll be in director's update, and my team is right now finalizing since, I'm looking at Mo, since we just, the board just voted on the dates for the board meetings next year. We are using that information and we're putting up a calendar of cadence for reports, the monthly dashboard, the quarterly report, what will be reported to the finance subcommittee, et cetera. And that will be shared with the board, through director's update.
So the quarter ending in March, first quarter, we won't have anything in January. Quarter ending in March, we'd actually look at in April. So it could be April before we have a public
Quarterly.
quarterly
For
update.
2020, but
Yes.
I plan to come to the board, I think it's in February or March, once we have the full financial statements for 2019 to report on 2019. Then starting for 2020, the first quarter of 2020 will be reported likely in April of 2020, and we'll go on a quarterly basis.
And it will be a more comprehensive, bigger view. We've discussed this several times. This is kind of for our knowledge and public knowledge of how we'll be looking, so.
And the goal is twofold. One of the reasons why I propose this new calendar, it's twofold. One is to give the board more actionable items, trends that are more meaningful, and also for efficiency. There's a lot of man hours that are put into these reports every month by the team, and I think there's a lot more value added work that they could do when we all put our brains together and report on a quarterly basis and not so much on a monthly basis. So.
Right. Okay, anyway, I think that's important that we all get reminded of that.
Yes.
Then corporate operating plan, we of course went over last month, but I see you've got some information here for us.
Yes, thank you. So I presented on the preliminary corporate operating plan last month. We spent over an hour talking about what built the plan, what were the assumptions, the expectations for the plan, and it's been almost 30 days or about a month. I don't think we received any public comment on the corporate operating plan. But what we did receive was more information. So now we have an extra month of operating information and financial information that we've been able to incorporate in the plan, and this is what typically happens between November and December. There's always an update because we can incorporate October financials into the plan. So the 2020 COP, and I'm gonna go through those slides that Mo has on the projected. We've updated for October actuals. We have November and December projections, but we have October actuals, so that changed a little bit of some of the numbers, and I'm gonna talk about those in a minute. And we also had the Power with Purpose resolution that the board approved last month, and so we've incorporated that and say, okay, now that we have these approved, what does this look like in 2020? What resources this may need in 2020? And we've incorporated some of those in the plan. We don't know yet. We're out with an RFP, so we don't know exactly how this is gonna turn out, but we have to make some estimates so that we have the financial and the budgetary capacity to do some of this work. So the next slide. These are the four main updates. The net income of 2020, we calibrated that net income to decrease by $1.6 million, really reflecting the lower projected cash balances in 2020. We are projecting to use some of our cash balances. We have good levels of liquidity. We can use some of those cash balances to finance some of the capital projects that we have going on. That means that we will have less interest income coming in, and so we reflected that in the net income, just $1.6 million lower interest income. A capital budget, an increase of $50 million to the capital budget for Power with Purpose. If you ask me what exactly are we going to do with that $50 million, I cannot tell you exactly, but there are many different things. Through the RFP and the engineers, what type of responses were may be able to accomplish in 2020. This is not the bulk of it. I think the bulk of it will come in 2021, 2022. But there may be, there's a probably that we may have some work occurring in 2020. We don't want to be caught off guard. And we believe that with best estimates with the engineers that $50 million of the capital budget should cover most of the work that may come our way through the power with purpose. So this is the rest of the capital budget. The capital budget is $230 million. $180 million we have very clearly specified projects that we're gonna use that money for. The other 50, we don't know exactly, but we have a good idea given the magnitude of the whole project for power with purpose, how these may work into the capital budget. So this is probably the piece where my team spent the most amount of time working with the engineers and working with the entire organization to figure out, okay, how much and where do we put these in the budget. Year-end cash balance, working with our Treasury division, I have John Turber back there, our Director of Treasury. We determined that our liquidity levels are solid, they're healthy, and then we're expecting a decrease in year-end cash balance of approximately $47.1 million. Most of it is tied to the $50 million increase in the power with purpose capital budget. Now, and this is going to be a separate item that will be up for your approval on Thursday, and it's going to be our authorization, as we always ask every year, to issue debt if we need to. The plan, we're not anticipating the need. We have the cash, we have the liquidity, we should be able to finance all of these internally without the use of debt. But if market conditions are favorable, we may act on these and issue debt to take advantage of market conditions. That's a separate topic that I'm going to touch on in the next couple of minutes. And I talked about the COP book. We updated the preliminary corporate operating plan. You have in front of you the final corporate operating plan. If you approve it on Thursday, this will be our budget. We walk side by side, page updates. Something that I would like to point to, if you go to page 31, it may seem like a minor update, but it is huge, at least from my perspective. At the bottom of page 31, under the column that's labeled budget of 2020, we have a debt to capitalization ratio of 56%. Last month, we were still finalizing some of the numbers. I reported that would have been a 58%. This is 56%. It is fantastic. Before the decision to decommission the nuclear plant in 2015, our debt to capitalization ratio was about 51%. That means that for every dollar of assets we own, we only owed 51 cents of that dollar. That's a healthy ratio. That ratio went up to the higher 60%, and that is, we didn't issue more debt, but we removed the Fort Calhoun asset from a utility plant and into a decommissioning plant. So that increased our ratio. Every year since, we've been adding more capital, we've been paying off existing debt, and we haven't been issuing any new additional debt. All of those three have contributed to the decline. All the way down to 2020, we believe we're going to be at 56% by the end of the year. Not quite where we started in 2015, but certainly a big improvement. I expect us to make another big improvement by 2020 to be down to the low 50% ratio. This is very much in line with other public power entities and what other public power entities have that have the same rating as we do, credit rating with investors. So something I'm proud of, that it didn't happen by accident. It's a lot of planning that you can see this as a result. 56% debt to capitalization ratio.
So, excuse me, so
yes.
that's just a good rule of thumb, 50% would be a long-term goal for us.
Low 50s, there's no prescriptive metric. Moody's and Standard & Poor's measure things a little bit differently. At some point we may increase that to 60 or 70% if we have to, if we have to issue debt for a large capital project. Being in this position allows us to then have that conversation. There are some other utilities who have a debt to capitalization ratio in the 80 or 90%. really doesn't give you a lot of flexibility to take on any more. We are in a really good place where we can then decide when we issue debt, how we issue debt, and the fact that we have that capacity to issue debt.
When you say, I mean, in a good place, as compared to, I mean, just threw out some, well, some people have 80%, as compared to other, in the whole industry, maybe, are we better than average, middle of the road?
We are right at the median. So Moody's Investor Service publishes a median report every year, and they compare a lot of public power entities. We are in the top 20 largest public power entities in the United States, and these would be very much in line with where other public power entities with our rating
Of our size.
and our credit rating.
Good question, thank you for that.
Thank you. And the last update you have, it's since you have your final COP open, pages 63 through 66, the last 4 pages of the COP includes the lengthier letter we get from Neogen Strategies and Solutions. The preliminary COP had a 1-page letter. So this one has, now that we have the final numbers, New Generation Strategies issues their full review of the COP, basically attesting to the fact that the assumptions are conservative, they're in line with other utilities, and that we are running the utility in a prudent way, that we're not shortchanging operations, but we're also not charging too much on some of the programs. So it's a good third-party review that keeps us in alignment with other utilities.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yeah.
Is that something we have to do under the law, or we do because it's best practice, or?
We do it as best practice, and we've been doing it for many years, and I think that's one of the things that I really liked when I joined OPPD was this best practice of having these type of letters that we get from the rate consultant as well. It's a good way to know, hey, we think we're good, but let's always check with a third party on this type of work.
Who did they take? They took the place of, was it Burns? Who was it?
Yes, no, not Burns and Mac, it was, out in Seattle. Well, one R.W. Beck, and then it was, CH2M Hill, I
Correct.
think, at one point in time.
That's right.
No, this is probably 4 or 5 years old,
Yeah,
probably.
Yeah, we've been.
The last slide I have, and there was a request, I think there was a request last month, to talk about the strategic initiatives. These are not strategic directives, but the 5 strategic initiatives that you've heard from my colleagues in the past few months. There is work that we're doing to advance all of these initiatives. Some of this work is capital, which is not represented here. Some of this work is operating and maintenance expense. That's what we're showing you up here. We took a very purposeful approach at figuring out, okay, let's make sure that we know in Troy's area, in energy delivery, Troy continues to, he will continue to operate his business unit as business as usual. That is included in his budget. We wanted to identify those extra programs or projects that he's taking on that are new, that without this strategic initiative we wouldn't have, and we are identifying those in the budget, making sure that as we stand up strategic initiatives that they are not unfunded. So we did that, and you can see the variety of numbers in here presented. None of them are called out in the budget. They are part of the O&M of each one of their divisions. We're calling it out here for your benefit to tie these to the strategic initiatives. They become now part of energy production's operating budget and energy delivery's operating budget, but we went through a thorough review of these. There are capital projects that are tied to the strategic initiatives as well. Those are not listed in here, but this is something new that we're doing. When we have strategic initiatives, we typically talk about the scope of the initiative. I am now tying these back to the budget. This is how we're gonna make these initiatives continue to happen in the future.
The price of that customer engagement is $400,000.
Workplace transformation to be determined scares me. What does that mean?
Really, well, go ahead.
I mean, we haven't gotten our charter put together yet. We're taking kind of a staggered approach to getting these charters done, so we haven't really taken a thorough look at what all the work is yet.
Ballpark?
Pardon?
You got a ballpark number of what it is, or I don't want to have you guess and that'd be wrong, but it's not in the millions or anything like
No,
that, is it?
I don't imagine so,
Yeah.
no.
Well, and again, what we may see in workforce transformation or workplace transformation, that may not even show up in 2020.
Right.
Right, that could be a 2021, based on all the work of the strategic initiatives, there's an outcome of the workplace transformation that will show up later as these initiatives are identified, to really understand what are the implications to the workforce, to the skill sets needed, to the workplace. So I think our thought is, we may not see anything in 2020, maybe some prep work, but really the expenditures would probably be more likely in 2021, 2022.
So should that be zero then?
Well, there may be some stuff, that's why we just put it in here.
For 2020?
Yeah, just as a, I just feel like with a corporate operating plan, like we can't have just these empty numbers,
Yeah.
right?
So what you're approving is already in here, and what we were saying, there is nothing identified in Mart's budget in the whole budget for the organization. Now, Mart, through the year, may determine, hey, there's a couple of initiatives that we can move forward. She has her budget to work with, and that's why we're putting
Okay, so you
to
want
be
to take
determined.
your own.
Funds if I needed to.
In the same way that Director Williams talked about, if we don't get the NET grant for a battery project, there might be a possibility. Correct. From years ago, we signed things around, like, budgets are guides, and it's helpful to have at least a little bit of flexibility to.
Correct.
Yeah, not that we don't support that, of course, I'm not saying that, but the way you described it is like, it won't be a ton, because you still haven't planned it all out, so. But I just, let me see that, so you want.
Well, and how that would,
Clarification.
if Mart, or when Mart does do the scoping piece, and she may come back and she may say, hey, it's $250,000, and so the challenge would be, can she do it within her budget? If not, how does it come back to the corporation, then how do we prioritize? And then there may be some things that we say, well, we're gonna take X, X, and X, and X. Now we can fund it, we have the capability to do it within the current O&M plan that we've laid out with the board.
And then we'd be
That's-
told about it later
Correct.
in the year.
Yep.
So I'm not sure what level of detail I need to know, but on these, then on page 15, we get like a one sentence description in the corporate operating plan of what each of these are. Correct? Right. Yeah, and then you said establish a charter, which is gonna be much more rich in information. When do we see that, or do we see
Yeah, so
that, or
you'll
have we
see-
seen that, and can it be put on diligent if we do see that? kind of
Yeah,
thing?
yeah, so our plan is if, as we've talked about this, and kind of what I'm doing in the one-on-ones is, we originally thought we'd have all the charters identified and come to the board and say, hey, here are the charters. And I think what we've now, as a senior team, begun to look at is that we're gonna stagger these for the benefit of the strategic initiatives, so we all of a sudden don't have movements that aren't anticipated. And so the first one the board will see will be a component of the pathways of decarbonization. So senior team is doing some review of that, and the teams are reviewing that. That'll probably be the first one that will come to the board as part of the preview after the first of the year, which will say, here's a scoping document, here's what it looks like. And then to get the feedback and insight from the board for us to move forward. And again, as I've said in the one-on-one conversations, these strategic initiatives are really my response to the strategic directives that you all have approved and gotten feedback from the public on. So it's kind of the management focus on the initiatives in order to meet those strategic directives. So probably after the first of the year, we'll begin to kind of cascade these out and show them to the board and have that conversation, so.
So the corporate operating plan is kind of our annual work plan of how we're spending our money in order to fulfill the strategic directives that the board, to fulfill the strategy that management has come up with that then meets the strategic directives that are set by the board. How do we convey that strategy to the public? We have a strategy document that?
We
or
will,
is it
yes.
just-
So, yeah, there'll be a very clear scoping document with timelines that the board will have the opportunity to see
For the strategic initiatives.
for the strategic initiatives.
Well, I'm kind of thinking organizational strategy.
Okay.
This is the corporate operating.
Hold on a minute. I mean, the way you described that question, that's on a month-to-month meeting. I mean, don't we do that all the time when we have our meetings, you're saying? There is no, you throw the plan out. What is, your question, you're saying, well, how are we gonna see that?
What's our organizational strategy is my underlying question.
So maybe a way to answer this.
Do we have a strategic
I
plan
see.
for the organization that we convey to the public?
Yeah, I think yes.
Strategic
There
directives
was,
and everything we do.
if I can jump in, I
Yeah.
think partially, I think what you're getting to, Director Yoder, is in June, if you recall, Tim presented the 10-year outlook and the vision that we have for the type of organization that we're seeking to create. It was a broad vision. It had broad implications for generation types, for transmission and distribution, for customer engagement, for and then what we do today from organizing is we break those into broader buckets. What are the 10-year guiding principles in support of the directives and in support of that vision? What are the imperatives over the next 3 years? And then more specifically, what are those initiatives that we're working on this year that are very plannable? We can associate dates, timelines, milestones, resources in order to take a step forward. I guess I have a clarifying question in terms of the type of plan you are envisioning more broadly when you ask your questions.
Some way to convey to the public, some document that the public might say, oh, you know, we have a lot of things going on here. What is that broader 5-year, 10-year vision that you've put together that weaves together expectations for what the market is, trend lines, and shifts in business model? I mean, it's a changing
Yeah, let us
industry.
take that, let us take that. I think we have the components of all that, and we shared elements of that in June when we laid out the strategic initiative, but I think to put it back together and to share it with the board, and maybe even at a public setting here would be good to do.
Yeah, I can't help but imagine that the pathways to decarbonization, the public outreach we're doing would start with that vision and then kind of cascade from there. So yeah, that makes sense.
And then we also discussed SD1, what our entire mission is too, from a very broad view too. And that's gonna be discussed. You know, so we have a very, very broad view, okay, what is our mission here, what's SD1? And we can go through, when we discuss SD1, that's the broader mission, and then we bring it down, it continues to filter down.
I'm sorry.
Well, what I was gonna say is I think there's an intermediary step between that vision and then the work plans. There's something in between that I'm not sure that has been articulated very clearly.
I think, yes, if you would not mind, let me take that. I think I understand what you're looking for. And there is probably a piece that drives these two things together that you can see and that the public can see. So let us pull that together. I'll take that. Actually, Scott will take that and we'll bring that back. So, and I think we'll try to drive the clarity on kind of what that looks like and how it's cascaded down to these strategic initiatives. So I appreciate that.
And so, Rick, we talked about this a little bit last month about making decisions that have future financial implications. And so that is kind of what you're looking for, is a future financial breakdown, because the only projection here is into the next 1 year. But there is no other financial projection breakdown longer than 1 year that's currently available.
So
Is that kind of what you're getting at?
I don't think that's all that I'm getting at, but I think that would be a critical part of what a strategic plan would have.
And I think in that conversation, very clearly on the financial side, I'll let Javier address this if he'd like, but part of the plan is try to get to that 10-year kind of outlook based on the strategies and the elements of what we're trying to do, which this organization has traditionally never done, right? So we've done kind of elements of maybe a 3-year financial plan, maybe 5-year, but it's really broad. And but what we bring to the board is that annual plan that statutorily we're required to submit to the board approve, and for us to adhere to. And so that'll be something that we'll bring back. We don't have the elements in place to lay that out today, but we're working through that and how we get there.
Yeah, how do we right-size that, right? Like,
Yeah.
because all of these things we're about to go through are going to inform it, and I don't wanna go through a big exercise to try and predict what the 10-year
No, I appreciate
financial
that.
picture
That's
is
exactly
without
Don't
having
waste
part
too
of the
much
process.
time here.
these completed, so
You
let's
have to sort
right-size
of
it.
do the
So,
strategic initiatives
Are you
first.
talking like a 3-year then, or what do you, I mean, if you're gonna create this, I mean.
I'm not even
one-
suggesting what the solution is yet. I don't know what the outcome is. I think what I'm hearing is that let us bring back to you kind of the elements and be very clear and connect the guiding principles with the imperatives, with the strategic initiatives and the existing work plan. And I think what you'll see is how the existing work plan today does tie to many of the elements in our guiding principles and our imperatives that we've laid out. And at least a visual on what we believe this marketplace looks like going forward. So I think I have it. If I need to do any clarifying questions, or you want to give me very clear specifics of what you're looking for, we won't have a 10-year plan when we kind of present this, but that'll be a long-term work that we're spending time on. So.
And I appreciate that, and really just a side note here, this is one of the reasons why we focus on financial health and metrics, to see how healthy is the organization financially, how can we shift and change and really pivot to do new things. If we had done this type of projection 5 years ago, 2014, boy, we would have been completely wrong.
Yep.
In 5 years, the board chose to decommission a nuclear station. We've added a ton of wind. Our exposure to SPP has changed. 5 years ago, we started participating in the day-ahead and real-time market in SPP. So things change a lot. So I'm not averse to projecting, but I think that's something that we do, and we'll continue to find a way to better inform things. But I think it's also important to know that the very nature of the operations that we have here make it really hard for us to pinpoint exactly where we're going to be. In my opinion, more important than that is how flexible are we? How nimble is this organization? And how the financial health is providing that flexibility that we can then force and change. To also ever-changing strategic directives, right? 5 years ago, we didn't even have those. And in the past 5 years, they've changed a number of times. So I think it speaks to that flexibility and being able to
Yeah, I think
react.
the conversation that Scott and I have had is that based on even this year's changes on the strategic directives, thinking about the guiding principles and the imperatives from our perspective needs to shift. And so after the first of the year, the senior team will do that. We'll do a deep dive on those guiding principles and those imperatives based on the changes to the current Power with Purpose is a great example of that. This is part of the movement. And so we're going to, we'll take that as a challenge to come back to you with kind of what that looks like going forward, at least the way we see it going forward, and for you to give us feedback and insight on that. So I appreciate that.
This one,
That's a good challenge.
it sounds like a big project and a challenge, I agree, and I think it's well needed for sure. How would that go then? Would you report to the governance committee, or are you just gonna throw it out there for everybody? What's the process, I guess, as you'd say?
I think we should let Scott do that. Scott can sort of help us with that.
And we would probably come back to the governance committee and kind of share, hey, here's what we're thinking about. Does this kind of meet what we believe the intent is? I don't think this is a lot of work on putting that together today. The work for us will be based on the changes that we've seen in these strategic directives. What does that look like? What are the changes and the trends, which we kind of do in our strategic planning process on these, on currently the strategic directives, but how does that assess in the trending in the market and the changes in the technology, whatever that may look like. And then we'll begin to put that together. We do that annually anyway. I think there's been enough significant change in some of the strategic directives that really have kind of changed the slope of the way the future looks that we need to take into consideration. So if you give us, a month or two to kind of bring that back together, we'll do that with some of those changes. I don't wanna spend a lot of time putting it together and then say, hey, by the way, 30 days, we're gonna be meeting and we're gonna be changing it again. If you give us a couple months to do that, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, and I agree, not too much time, but the idea that there would be some future financial projections included there seems important to me. Because similar types of future-looking plans include 6-year plans from NDOT or the City of Omaha's Capital Improvement Program, or the NRDs are mandated to have a long-range implementation plan, and the accuracy of that is dramatically lower than a 1-year budget, but it does understand that multi-decade types of infrastructure development have large-scale consequences for many years into the future, and decisions we make about generation, which we talked about last month with Power with Purpose, do allocate future resources for many years into the future. And at the time of those decisions, being able to understand what those future implications are through a many-year financial decision matrix would be very helpful, so that we understand when we make these choices, there are, by definition, fewer choices available in the future. I think that's something we covered last month, and so the idea that we understand future allocation of financial resources based on decisions that we're currently making is something that would help, I think would be very helpful in guiding how we end up with one-year budget, one-year corporate operating plans out of a long-term future projection based on decisions that have been made many years in the past, or decisions made now that will have many years into the future implications.
Yeah, I think the only caveat I would say to that, Director Williams, is that because of the nature of the business that we're in, I think it's completely different than city, county operations and traditional non-market, not significant regulation. I mean, certainly I understand, being part of what the city of Omaha was doing and the combined sewer stuff, whatever that future plan looked like, it got shifted when the combined sewer plan and initiative went through. That's the kind of level of changes we're seeing in our industry today, whatever that may look like. I think I have what your intent looks like. Let us take back and see if we can do a broad look. We will not spend a deep dive and lay out what are those 100 projects for the next 10 years and what that looks like, because I don't know what they're gonna be based on some of the changes that we see.
The moment you guess at it, they'll change a month later.
And so I'm sensitive about the value of time and effort with what's going on. I think we can do some broad related pieces, right? So here's what we believe our capital, here's what we believe our O&M, here's what we believe kind of revenue streams are, which, how we have kind of commented on Power with Purpose being, we don't see any great impact to that. So let us put together, I think, what we believe would be reasonable for you to give us some feedback on, but also reasonable for us to put together without significant resources on something that I know is gonna change.
Yeah, and I think
right
we have
away,
to worry
so.
about resource management too. And I appreciate you saying that. You can give us a broad idea, but I don't think we need to go down into great depth for this. If you look at what we've got right here as far as initiatives just for this year is what we're working on. We really have, your plate is full with our strategic directives and Power with Purpose right now.
So I think this question is related to this. On page 64 in that letter from NewGen, it refers under the integrated resource plan, resulting balance of loads and resource schedule from the current integrated resource plan was compared with the corresponding schedule from the prior year's integrated resource plan. What I understand though is that integrated resource plan was something that was done a few years ago. Help me understand what they were actually looking at there.
Right, it's a 2016 IRP that we published, and then every year we looked at that. We don't necessarily do a full IRP as I've mentioned in the past, but the team runs a similar exercise. What is our generation capability? What is our load forecast? Every year our load is changing, and then they do a comparison. Is our generating plant capable of meeting the requirements of the load forecast we have next year? So that's what it's referring to on these ones.
Is there something inside this document that they were looking at that, or is that a supplemental document that they were?
So what they look at that is the inputs that go into these documents. So it's a load forecast that informs these, and it's the resource alignment that we have, all the wind, coal, gas, solar, the community solar, all the assets that we have, and they do an estimate, a benchmark test to say, do you have enough to meet your load forecast?
Okay. So resource in this paragraph just means generation resources.
Resource adequacy, yes.
Thank you.
Javier, I've got two quick questions, page 27. I think I need help understanding what the projected 2019 net income is, especially in light of the fact that our slope has us around 80 million today, but this year. Can you help me understand what the difference is between those two?
The projected and the budget.
Yeah.
So what the projected does, it takes 10 months of actuals and 2 months of forecast. And so the original budget is what we guessed 18 months ago, $77 million for projected.
So to that end, when I see us at 80 today, and I think we're projected to be, that's what I'm having the trouble is what's the difference between the 80 and the 98 that's in here?
That's a good question. Where the 80 that you saw, you're talking about.
I'm reflecting back on, your report earlier on.
That 80, it's $77.6 million. It refers to the same 77. So what I reported in the reporting item on the financials, I am still, the practice has been, let's keep reminding ourselves, where was the budget intended to be? So what you have here is a budgeted net income, 77.6 million.
Yep.
What we're seeing here, the projections is that we may end up a little higher than that. It could be a little lower. It depends on how we end December, how December comes in. The $98 million that was included in here did not include November financials, and certainly doesn't include the December financials, the actuals.
Okay.
I'm not.
There's a big delta there, I guess, is what I'm caught off guard by.
And it's indicative of the volatility that we've expected in the first 10 months of the year.
Alright.
The team is trying to figure out and forecast what the November actuals were gonna be and the December actuals were gonna be.
Okay. And this perhaps is a question that I can get answered later, but the footnote, I appreciate a lot having that detail about $5 million for DSM and energy efficiency. Curious as to what that was previously, what the increase is there. And again, if that's not something you've got at hand, later is fine.
We have added, I think, about 250,000 over what it was the year before, and we've shifted to more energy efficiency in the budget.
Got it. Thank you.
And that is in response to SB7?
That and the DSM potentiality study, what we came out of that with, what we were gonna focus on.
Thank you.
And we made the decision to start footnoting and disclosing these, because I think it's something that Julie and I felt strongly about.
Yeah, thank you.
So when we're talking about strategic planning and the corporate operating plan, then on page 12, I'm really confused about why you're still using percent renewables as our 2020 target when that's not even part of our SD7 anymore. I mean, I get it that you have the footnote there, but why can't we have at least the current intensity from last year's strategic directive initiative? And why has that one not been updated? I just didn't understand why we are still falling back to the percentage of renewables. On page 12, environmental stewardship SD7, it does not make sense to me that this is still included in our corporate operating plan when it's not part of our strategic directives anymore.
If I may, it's timing. When we start working on the COP, we start working on this in April. Right, it's how we start planning all the work to meet all the strategic directives that we have at that point in time. So earlier this year, the carbon intensity had just been adopted. We're trying to figure out, okay, how are we gonna start measuring that, and how are we gonna build a budget that meets that metric? At the time, percent of renewables as a percent of retail sales had already been in place. So it was a way for us to say, okay, are we aligning our resources in a way that is meeting our strategic directives? That's how the budget was built. Now, to your point, SD7 has been amended and it has new metrics. This budget wasn't necessarily built that way. Now, we know, we've consulted both the board and senior management. We know that it is doable and we're moving in that direction. But to keep some discipline in the budget cycle, we had to still anchor these two previous metrics and how are we moving. It would be disingenuous for me to say this budget was created to meet the new SD7. we needed a long run time to build the budget. But
If you
certainly,
had an SD7 that said carbon intensity,
it had just been approved, so this budget started the process started in March, April of this year. SD7, the revision of SD7 on carbon intensity happened in November, so a few months beforehand. We had already had the percent of renewables. We can put it in there if you're interested. But it's important for me to talk about the timing and the cycles of the budget, and that SDs will change, and we'll try to keep up as much as we can, but at some point you just have to use the SDs that you have at the moment and figure out how are we meeting those SDs.
So I appreciate the explanation, and that's valuable, thank you. Since it's a public document, right, I think if it doesn't change the numbers dramatically, I would certainly agree that we should probably see the more current version of what SD7 says in our assumptions.
I think that, and I would turn to Mary and Russ with regards to the carbon intensity number, and if we could add that as a line before Thursday, it's approved, certainly we could.
Currently it's footnoted.
Yeah, it's footnoted. And then the second thing, as you know, the systems committee is working to make a determination in terms of how they want to look and what metrics they want to look at when it comes to the net zero carbon. So those measures have not actually been determined. And the intention would be to borrow from what the systems committee is saying and have ultimately a corporate scorecard that would reflect those metrics, whatever those would need to be and whatever the committee decided. So those are the discussions right now. What I would say for the purposes of planning, the reason that it's footnoted was to reflect that it's part of the discussion. There's awareness and there's thinking about it without necessarily having that specific line, but if there's a comfort level in adding a line that would show carbon intensity and that we have the data that would allow that to be showed, we could put that in, but the reality is the new metric is net zero carbon and those other two kind of go away, period. So in November, we were in an interesting transition period around those metrics, and I think that page is more a reflection of where we were in the discussion and less of how we're planning, if that makes sense. So I guess I would like clarity on direction in terms of what change, if something needs to be done before Thursday when the COP is being approved.
what I would like to see is at a minimum, some reference to the carbon intensity that was in place in April when we started this process.
More than the
line.
footnote that's in here already?
And on that line, instead of the percentage of renewables, because percentage of renewables wasn't even part of our strategic directive.
It was one of two metrics.
Oh, it was one of two metrics, okay.
And we've got carbon intensity in there already. I mean, how much work is it gonna change to move that carbon intensity footnote up? I mean,
We can make it, we can make any changes that you
this
wish.
is a minor.
It's reprinting and doing the.
It's not a carbon intensity footnote.
It's not footnoted? The carbon
It's footnoted in
intensity?
here on
Yeah,
page
it
12
is.
at the
Page
bottom.
12. You know, that's gonna cost money for reprinting and everything else. Do we really need
12.
that?
And it also includes the net zero language that was recently.
Okay, good.
So we're making reference to it, but
We're making reference.
Yep,
Let's
got
not.
We're okay.
I'm comfortable with it.
okay.
But I think next year, I don't wanna see these lines. Next year, for the 2021, I think we wanna see, instead of percent renewable and instead of carbon intensity, we wanna see the net zero carbon goal reflected in 2021's operating plan.
Okay.
Quick question on the whole publication of this. It's posted on the website after we pass it. How much of this actually goes out in a physical form?
We used to print many copies, now we're trying to save paper, so it's only printed
I think
for
it's probably around this.
very
time.
limited
It's looking like
senior
this.
management on the board. It's available online, it'll be available online.
It's on there right now as part of the committee package for this.
Whatever we come up, we can change it online, and we don't print a lot of these and send
Yeah,
them.
yeah, yeah,
out, so,
right,
you know,
right.
but-
Let's go back to the big picture again. Do you wanna add anything else here?
No, not from the corporate print plan.
The big picture of the budget is $1.3 billion. This is a big company that we're running, and we appreciate the amount of time and effort that everyone's put in this for the past many, many months to developing this corporate operating plan. It starts way back in March, April to do this,
And will again.
and will again.
I had no idea it was that long. You took it.
So following on Rick's question earlier about the future projections, from page 59, Nebraska City Unit 1 low pressure rotor replacement. Now, is this the expenditure for the item that we approved a few months ago?
Yes.
So this is the 3689 is the capital expenditure we are anticipating in 2020 based on the previous board action on 10.9 million total expenditure overall for the upgrade. Mary, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Just want to make sure that I'm understanding how this is ending up here, is that we did already take action. This was expected. It is now appearing in the budget as a project that's happening. And then similarly, I mean, I guess just the next line down, I don't remember anything that came up on the Unit 2 fabric filter. Is that an expected maintenance item? And so this is the kind of thing that would be kind of expected future expense.
What I would call as routine maintenance.
And so those are the kinds of things that I think the question was about. When we look forward, we expect that there are things that we would be able to understand would be coming up in some future timeline. And so this is an every few years type of thing, or again, just a specific example of the thing that we talked about earlier.
Right.
This is a 3-year, 5-year regular maintenance item?
I don't remember, this one I
But I
can
think
look
what-
through and get back to you.
yeah, I think
But
what
they
we
are
could-
just routine maintenance.
Yeah, I
items.
think, the way I look at this is that, I think as we think about this strategic plan, I think there's some high-level pieces that we can do. We can kind of say, hey, here's what we think revenue's gonna look like, here's what we think kind of O&M costs are gonna look like, here's what we think net income's gonna look like, based on any other significant changes or regulatory or whatever that may look like, and to give that projection of what that may be, without getting into, hey, here are the specifics. Because the specifics are based on, there certainly are some routine things that say every 3 years I have to do this, but a lot of these are based on inspections that occur that drive other kinds of things. And so, but I think in a bulk kind of O&M or capital piece, I think we can kind of be broad in those kind of categories that may provide at least some, assurance to the board that we have an understanding of what that future may look like without having to get into the details and say, hey, we believe X dollars are for this unit or this system or this transmission line without knowing.
So not everything on the capital budget and not everything in this list has come to the board yet. Some are yet to come, some already came. We have to forecast and plan the type of work. To answer your question on how often this happens, if this is an annual maintenance, no, this is not an annual maintenance, otherwise it would not be part of the capital budget. This is something that happens every so often, but when we replace these filters, my understanding is sitting in the resource planning committee is when we replace these filters, they stay in for a long time. Now, we go in every 3 or 5 years to replace different sets of filters that will stay there for a long time, but there are capital investments that have a longer useful life.
And I just don't recall when was the last time you've done it.
Yeah, and it's 0 back to 2014, so at least 5 years, so that covers what I was asking. Thank you.
But if you look at those project expenditures, what they give you is 2014 to 2018. There's a line as far as stuff. It's interesting that I appreciate that you're, as far as levy certification and looking into that, that's a $4,721 expense there, yeah.
But, there's, what would it be? You're a board member looking at this stuff and you're not doing it every day, and these are millions of dollars of expenses. It adds up,
This is a
so this is a good time to ask
$1,000,000
questions, I
Oh,
know,
great.
because we kind of went through this.
This is
corporate
part-
operating plan quickly, but this is, it adds up, and you say, geez, what's that for? So it's a good educational opportunity.
Remember the $230 million capital budget, if you subtract the $50 million for power equipment, it's $180 million that, these are some of the largest single items. There are many other ones that are smaller and,
So it tells you where your money's going if you look at
Right,
it.
right.
Page
So this is
58,
one of the largest
59
ones
for all
of
the
the
public,
big
if you wanna
chunks.
look at it, where our recommended
To
projects
give you an
are.
idea, the Resource Planning Committee, which has voting members, representatives from each business unit, we met, I believe it was 9 times this summer, like day-long meetings, where we go through every single project that is presented to us. And we prioritize, we challenge projects. There were projects that were not approved, that we said, we don't need it. Or do we need it this year? Should we move on a different project this year? So there's a lot of scrutiny. I participate in those meetings as well as Kate and many other directors at the district. So this is, I'm just reporting on the vetting process that happens on the capital. It's pretty intense, very thorough. We have engineers and project managers talking to us about the need and the priority. This is how we come up with the list.
Janice, I know you had a question earlier
I
today,
did.
and I don't know if that answers it, but I'll let.
Not really, so I'll ask Mary.
Yeah.
So on page 19, when we're talking about assumptions, and talking about North Omaha stations 4 and 5, and outages, how does this get us to power with purpose, number one? And is this routine maintenance on turbines that will be then also utilized once we switch over to gas, or if that happens? So my question is how does that get us through the power with purpose, and is this maintenance that we're gonna do that will be just undone once we switch to gas?
This is maintenance that we do pretty much on an annual basis. It gets us, and what changes is the scope of the maintenance that gets done. But we do have preventative maintenance that we do. We take outages to do those. North Omaha 4 and 5, we do what we call summer tune-ups as well. So we'll go in and clean the precipitators. We'll do condenser cleaning, those sorts of things. That's just routine maintenance that we're gonna go in and do before summer months. The North Omaha one, every 2 years, they have a boiler inspection. It's due for its boiler inspection, so it'll be a little bit longer outage. And so these are just routine maintenance that we do prior to every summer. The scopes will change depending on what was done the previous year. And so we'll continue to do that preventative maintenance on these units because we need them through 2023.
No.
And so that's how it gets us to the power with purpose, right? We need these units to be operating between now and then. Why we're doing all the RFPs and doing all the work to bring on our other assets.
Point of clarification, yes, routine maintenance, there are certain projects in here that qualify as capital. They're not necessarily maintenance, they might have a little longer life. A conversation that happened a ton this year, I'm looking at Kate, was when these projects were proposed, the conversation was, is this a 30-year project? Is this gonna extend the life of the asset for 30 years? If it's so, come back to us because it is very possible. Remember, these conversations happened in July and August. We already knew what Power with Purpose was gonna come in to the board later in that year. The board hadn't approved it, but it was a scope that for every project that was approved, there's always a discussion about, are we extending the life of this asset beyond what we know it's gonna be its useful life? And so for North Omaha 4 and 5, it was important because these assets are gonna be there for a long period of time. Even though Power with Purpose looks at them being converted into natural gas, we're still counting on those assets. We need to have good investments in those turbines and those units. Now, if it had been a project to extend the life of North Omaha 1, 2, and 3, that would have been a different discussion. But it's certainly part of the discussion on the prioritization we have to go through.
I think that answers the question.
So I have another question, and maybe it's just I can't find it. I'm looking at page 21. Maybe it's just I can't find more deep information elsewhere, or did find it and lost it. I don't know. The fossil and peaking units in the top box under fuel costs.
Yes.
I'm just observing that, and I guess my question is, the observation is that it's budget 2019 and budget 2020, and there's, the changes are there. Did we receive what actuals were for 2019, broken out by fossil and peaking?
Yes, I mean, that's what builds up these numbers. In 2019, well, actually what you have here is the budget.
Yeah.
We have actuals.
Was that part of the corporate?
It was
operating
what
plan?
informed the 2020, yes. So we looked at the 2019 budget, and then 2019 happened.
Right.
Right, and we had the flood, we had natural gas prices, we had a bunch of things that happened. And so those have informed how we build the 2020 budget. Were there improvements that we could make for 2020 that we didn't have in 2019, and all of those made their way in here. We mentioned earlier fossil costs. It was a conversation on coal. Decisions we're making on the type of coal, the quality, they were all included in the 2020 budget, as well as how long the peaking units ran, the forecast for gas prices, all of that informed the 2020.
Fossil is actually coal and peaking units is natural gas? Is that how that breaks down?
Mostly, yes, that would be a good way of looking at it.
Okay, so they're all fossil, but you're talking about coal
Base
in the
load versus
fossil
peaking.
line is coal, right?
Inflexible versus flexible.
Yeah.
And the peaking and the other is natural gas or,
More intermittent as opposed to base load.
okay.
Thank you.
Okay, any more questions on the COP? Okay, hearing none, we'll move to the next item. Is that
First is action item, not.
It will be an action item for Thursday.
Thank you, that was my question, yes.
And I'm planning, I think that the tradition has been for me to present these slides in public again on Thursday, so I apologize for the repetition, but that's my plan.
One you should.
Yeah, it's a short, yeah, no problem.
Okay, the next item we have, this is a best practice, something that I'm proud of doing, and had a long conversation with John Thurber about these. These didn't used to be, the quarterly report on pension funding didn't used to be a board item many years ago. We tracked it, we reported it every now and then, but it's a best practice that we've adopted since 2005, 2006, where it is important for the board to be actively engaged. Even if there's not a lot to talk about, it's important for me to report to the board, how are we doing on our pension funding and the returns we're getting on the fund. So this is the third quarter. It would have been reported last month, but if you recall, last month we had an 8-hour committee meeting. The agenda was pretty full, so we chose to report it this month. It shows earnings through September 30th for our pension fund. I would summarize these without taking too much of your time. There's a lot of description in the report here, but through the first 9 months of the year, the total fund year-to-date earnings were 12.2%. A very positive year. Our threshold, our discount rate for the pension fund is 7%, so that's the threshold we're trying to meet every year overall on average. If you recall, 2017 was a very positive year. We were in the double digits, somewhere around 16% year end. 2018 was exactly the opposite, it was -6. It's not a great year. Mostly because in 2018 it was really December. December markets wiped out most of the earnings of the year. So I'm knocking on wood because we still have about half of December left to go. But so far, this 2019 has proven to be a favorable year. You can see that there's a graph. The third page of the report has a graph that shows a line of the market valuation of the fund dipping in 2018 and then recovering basically to the same level we were, almost to the same level we were in 2017, positive earnings. We continue to be actively engaged with our financial consultant, with Siegel Marco, and we hold semi-annual meetings with our fund managers. We bring them at different points in time to come talk to us about their strategies for investments. We conduct, we are planning to actually conduct in the next year or so an asset liability allocation study for the pension plan. We do this every 5 years, just to make sure that our asset allocation matches our what the liabilities are on the plan. So I'm happy to report that for the first 3 quarters of 2019, the fund has performed better than expected, which is helping offset some of the losses in 2018. That's a long-winded explanation. Everything's good.
And does anyone watch any of the?
We have we constantly work with our financial advisors. There are a few of our managers that are on watch, and we are actively working with them. I think it's premature for me to disclose and talk about that because we haven't gotten the full diligence from our advisors. But when that comes, and that time is coming here in the next couple of months, we will report this to the finance subcommittee and eventually bring it to the board. If there's a need to change managers, we'll definitely keep the board informed. Okay. And the last item I have for the finance subcommittee is this is a resolution that the board, we present to the board every year. In order for OPPD to have the ability to issue tax-exempt bonds to finance capital, especially capital that has already been spent, the board of directors has to approve a resolution before we spend those monies to say we don't anticipate to issue bonds, but if we do, our intention would be to issue tax-exempt bonds to reimburse ourselves for capital expenditures that are about to happen starting in January 1, 2020. The board approved this same resolution last year or the year before, and it keeps the door open really for us to say, if market conditions are favorable, we can choose to issue tax-exempt bonds to reimburse ourselves for capital projects that were incurred in 2020. The capital projects are included in the $230 million capital portfolio that I just talked about in the COP. So it's a requirement that allows us to issue tax-exempt debt.
And you've done a very good job, actually. I thank you and your team of informing us how you're doing it, when you're doing it, you know, and the benefits. We've received many benefits from doing this.
Right. And this really, what this allows us is that when we issue debt, we can issue it at significantly lower interest rates. If we didn't have these and we had to issue debt, we can always do that, but it would be at significantly higher interest rates, so the taxable market would be.
When he said, he said legally we have to do this, state law or federal law or?
State law.
What?
State law.
Oh, state law.
And federal law on the IRS piece, the tax exemption allows.
We follow that, but it's not directly binding, so, yeah.
Earlier, Javier, you referenced this when we were looking at the slides on the corporate operating plan and talking about the 50 million that would be putting into the capital budget. I guess I would, since they're both going to be on the agenda on Thursday night, I guess I would clearly bring up the apparent connection between the two, even though we have separate ways of handling what's going on there.
I will make a point to describe that clearly. Let's talk about the separate resolution. It's an option, it's not part of the plan, we're not depending on it, but we need the board's agreement so that if we have the opportunity, then we can exercise this option to issue tax exempt. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, this is a good time to bring up the consent agenda idea. When governance was having a discussion about consent agenda, the idea is if anyone wanted to make any statement or anything about that item, that should not be on the consent agenda, it should be on the action item agenda. So I'm asking whether or not anyone wants to make a statement about this item, or should it go on the consent agenda?
So with the caveat
That's what I mean.
that he will,
That's what I'm bringing that
I'll
up.
that you'll
reference
make the
back.
point,
Right.
yeah, then I guess I won't feel like I need to.
And I've placed in everybody's place a draft of the board agenda for Thursday for feedback.
Yeah.
So right now we have the corporate operating plan and the corporate officer compensation adjustments listed as discussion items.
So if anyone wants to discuss this capital expenditure reimbursement, we'll put this on the action item. Just so people are aware of that.
Well, you can, yeah.
And we have
Put
till
it on the consent then, is what you're saying?
It's on, just right now,
It's on
the-
consent.
right now, this
If
is
you
on
wanna talk
consent.
about it, then she
We would
needs
move
to
this to the action item, sorry.
Figure it out here, so we don't have to.
I'm trying to figure it out here right now, so we don't have to do this at the last minute or anything.
At the last minute being tomorrow.
Yes,
It was a little goofy last month when we had these consent items that had.
yeah, that should have, those should have been action items.
What the hell's the point, you know?
They should have been action items. Is what we just discussed in governance.
To reiterate that
Yes.
bright line, per our conversation, any comment.
Yes,
I'm really happy about this, this is great, like, that's the kind of stuff that I think we're generally trying to
avoid.
if we can. Consent agenda is all about just like get it done, get going, and if you wanna make a comment on something, then that's supposed to get pushed.
And Eric's not here, so we're gonna have to figure out.
Which-
Well, he never said.
Which on that,
If I could propose at the end,
Okay,
it may be
Scott.
helpful, it may be helpful to go through the full board meeting agenda at the end and just
Yeah.
reconfirm
That's
the
even
items.
better, thank you. Okay, thank you, but I thought I'd bring this up now since we were talking about the two things.
Okay, so that concludes the finance subcommittee report.
I think we're gonna take a break right now for lunch and reconvene after lunch. How much time do we need? 20 minutes, 15 minutes?
Sounds
Are we digesting?
15 to 20 minutes.
You don't, we just want you to eat it, you don't have to digest it.
Okay.
20 minutes in.
Mine's the same as last month. I brought a Japanese chicken salad.
Are we done?
There goes my name, just killed me.
I'm not the only one. She sputtered earlier.
Mine filled out.
There you go. See, it's coming back.
You don't have to do that. I think that's I know. Maybe I don't.
Oh, you know what? When I went to that meeting, I drove.
Okay,
to
we're ready.
Chesterfield and Jack-
We're back and we're running. Thank you very much. We're not going, Mr. Yoder, you ready to give us the system management nuclear report?
Yes, Director Fire. Thank you so much. We met, well, 3 of the 4 of the regular system management nuclear oversight board members met on December 4th. Director Mulhoff was out of town and therefore excused, and Director Moody joined us. So we were thankful to have a full foursome for a discussion on SD9 and SD7. Also thankful that it was a full turnout, I felt, by senior management team, and thank you very much for being there and helping us with the discussion. I have provided, and you will find in the diligent notes, a slide deck to help provoke a discussion about SD9 and SD7. SD7, I'll start with first. After the board and systems had moved SD7 out for board approval, and in the discussion for board approval, we did talk about crafting some legislative notes is what we coined it, but Mr. Foch mentioned it earlier today that SD7 is working on some kind of expectations, or Systems Committee is working on some kind of expectations on what the report out would be for SD7 this coming year and in future years. As I said, I laid out several different note elements, but really the discussion all came down to the carbon footprinting and the carbon discussion. And it seemed that, in my opinion, what that discussion led to was an expectation that we will have for those carbon emitters that are already regulated, a good history of what's there and what our expectations will be moving forward. And then for those that are not regulated, i.e. carbon emitters in the building and transportation categories, that there will be a baseline that's put together, and that's really all we would expect the first year. The baseline asking what kind of measurement system in place, the greenhouse gas protocol, and I believe that was a nod we got from environment and the systems VP. So other discussion items really didn't move forward, so that's fine. I think that's what the committee said. Did you have some follow-up?
I did have a follow-up email, and I wanted to see if there was a response. Mary, I had asked if the carbon emission reporting baseline is for new activities that have not previously been accounted, but the annual carbon intensity report we've had the last couple of years has been posted in March. So on this annual carbon intensity report, should we expect that the breakout by source or by generation unit would be available? Is that something that we could include in that something like March timeline report rather than waiting until the monitoring report, which would probably be toward the end of the year?
Yes, that's what we had talked about in the pre-committee meeting, and yes, we will do that.
Okay, great. And I'm sorry if I had not understood that completely, because I sent that follow-up email just to verify that that would be something that could be reported prior to the annual monitoring report, so.
Yeah,
Thank
and we'll do that with our annual reporting in March by unit for those existing units.
Great, thank you for the clarification.
Director Yoder, you had said that this is on Intelligent someplace, your notes, because I cannot.
So if you go down to the Systems Committee, then you'll see that, actually, I think you included it in the committee as a whole, didn't you?
Today's packet.
It's in
Yeah.
today's packet.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm looking at the resource center. Okay,
No, so it's on today's packet.
okay, thank you.
So, and to reiterate, those were just my comments there. It's not meant to be collective of the people who are attending.
The one thing that I would add, in addition to everything that you described, that you were spot on, was I think the emission, there are some very self-evident emissions that I think we all know about, right? But then there are also kind of a group of emissions that we're not really clear as to whether or not we want to include them in what we're going to be baselining and measuring over time. So part of the discussion was about the importance of benchmarking versus other utilities to see which of those kind of, I'll call them on the fringe emissions, we want to include in our baselining.
Yeah, in baseline. Yeah, great. So, thank you for that clarification. Yeah?
Sorry, took a bite.
I can, like, jibber jabber while
On the other item, SD9, do you want to provide some update on, we talked about.
I will talk about SD9.
You are coming back, I'm sorry, I wasn't sure if you were.
Nope, that's sure coming back.
Yep.
So I just want to make sure we're all covered on SD7. Any other questions from the other members of the board about SD7 and our intent? I don't think that, well, I guess I will formalize some kind of narrative on that, just to have that come out of committee, but I don't know that it's really necessary. I think we came to an understanding, but I can do it just to clean things up. SD9, so again, I offered some slides on things we might include in a changed SD9. And this is where I'm most thankful that Director Moody was there, and that he provided the observation that not every member of the board thinks that there needs to be a change in SD9, which was the point of the discussion to begin. I am thankful for members of the senior management team who offered us some questions about, well, what is it you would ask us to do differently with a different SD9? So really, rather than spend any time on developing what an SD9 might look like at this point, I think it's incumbent on the systems committee and with input from the other members of the board, is there a need to redo SD9? And I don't know if now's the best time. Well, I would prefer not to do that at this point in time. What I would prefer to do is offer some narrative on what the underlying need is or could be, and defense of that, and then offer it out to the members of the board. Does that seem reasonable for an approach?
I think that's an excellent idea, because when we had our workshop, one of the big thing is that right now it's a how. Most of it is a how. And then the question is, do we really need it? Would that how go into other strategic directives? And I think that's where the discussion, I think, is that what you're talking about, where it may be going?
Correct. Thank you for asking. Other members who are in the meeting needing further clarification on that?
I'll just connect a couple of dots. I think that's why we were asking while we were reviewing corporate operating plan about a more of a strategic plan, and that connecting the dots between a work plan and that vision, that perhaps maybe instead of integrated resource planning, it becomes something else. And so I think that we're trying to figure out what's that something else. But to your question during the subcommittee, what more would that cause you to have to do or do differently? That question is very apropos, and so it's being considered. So I think that's where a lot of our conversations are revolving around right now.
Thank you.
In the idea that if SD9 itself is not necessary, but that there are things that have been kind of covered in this area that might belong in other categories, 2, 7, 13, something like that, updates in language that would reflect more clearly the idea of how this would specifically relate to resource planning would probably be a discussion at the time of the updates of those other SDs. Sure. And so that would be one of the potential paths that we discussed forward was, is this something held together in this location, or is this something that should be implemented through a variety of other locations? And if so, what updates would be appropriate in those locations to make sure that during resource planning processes, we have SD13 sufficient customer engagements covered in that directive. So that was kind of one of the potential paths forward. Or does it make sense to try and hold it together in this location as a resource planning specific set of items? So those are two different kind of paths that we had discussed, and I agree. There was no conclusion about what should be the next step. So more discussion.
Let's come up with the need. So thank you for that, for offering another path. Thank you for suggesting it was a good example. I think it was. The question then becomes, okay, if there is another process, then who's responsible for that process and how do we ensure that that happens?
You know, it'll be interesting as we go through the SDs this year, that we're mindful of what is in this resource planning, and should that be there, you know, as far as discussion. You know, there's
Or even from the system committee, is there a recommendation on, hey, these are some items we think ought to be considered, so you kind of officially document what you believe those items should be at least considered in SD2 or SD13 or whatever the SDs are. So you have it documented, so then whoever has those SDs can then take those into consideration as they vet that out and come back. I would say that way it's kind of documented with the systems committee on what your thoughts are and where they may show up, and then let the appropriate committees then take that into consideration as they review the SDs.
And to that point, hadn't thought of it, so thank you. The slide deck that I put together, just kind of identifying topics without fleshing them out much, might be a good starting point. Okay, thank you, everybody. With that, then, excuse me, I'd like to turn it over to Vice President Fisher.
Thank you. A brief overview on what's going on in the decommissioning world. We currently have 6 canisters full of fuel and inserted into the horizontal storage modules out on the independent spent fuel storage installation pad. That contains 192 fuel bundles. If you remember, there were 10 there before. We've added 6 in, so now there's 16 out on the pad in total. Working on the 7th this week as we speak. So that's moving along nicely. We are continuing to construct the operations facility, the new security facility for the independent spent fuel storage pad. Continuing to work with our vendors. We've had some delays in the manufacturing. The team actually went out and watched them doing some of the manufacturing and have really talked to them about how it is that we can update where we're going and what's going to be the outcome of the manufacturing delays. We've gone in and resequenced some of our activities to gain some of that time back. So we believe we're on schedule, but continue to work with that vendor to make sure that we stay on track. Last but certainly not least, we're doing a detailed site characterization. Some of you may remember we did this very early on as we went into the decommissioning. One of the things that we talked about at that time is it's really important for us to understand what the status is of that site. Now we're going in and doing it much more detail, much more depth as we start to lay out the plans for the actual deconstruction of the facility. And so we are going out and identifying, trying to quantify now the hazards that are within each one of those areas. So we have a contractor that's out taking surveys. They're actually using what I would call like a core bore that would go in and pull out some concrete samples. And that work has typically taken months to do. We found a contractor that brought us in some innovative ways to do that. And they actually have it down to a little over 2 weeks now. So innovations like that we're looking at to try to speed up what we're doing in the decommissioning and still retain the quantity, the quality, and of the information, as well as making sure that we're protecting our workers going forward. So that was been something that I just wanted to mention because I thought it was very innovative.
So on that, we're finding things with this last bullet then, do we expect any kind of changes to scope of work or budget demands?
So what I would say is we're not finding things unexpected. This is typically what we would expect. As an example, when you go in and you bore into the concrete, you're typically going down 6 inches to a foot. What we're trying to determine now is what is that actual depth. We made some assumptions about that. I don't think we'll see significant changes in what we had determined previously. But until we get this done later this month, kind of early into December, we won't actually know that. When we looked at it a few months ago as we were going into the contract negotiations with the vendor, their knowledge and expertise said we thought that the volumes were about right. We're just trying to go in and confirm that now. And the other thing is we want to make sure that we have it adequately resourced as we go into those areas to make sure that we're doing all the things we need to do. clean out the hazards in the area.
You know, Mary, I think maybe Tim can help refresh my memory or whatever, but after the 2011 flood, I think the NDEQ and OPPD got together and we did that type of site characterization after that flood. Is that something necessary that we're gonna have to do? First of all, can we use any of that information as a baseline? And then if there is more flooding, do we need to do that continually? How does that work as far as the?
So I'm talking internal to the buildings, you're talking external to the buildings. External to the buildings, we did a site characterization in the fall of 2016 to confirm what we had seen after the flood. As we've gone through flooding this year, they continue to take samples to make sure there's nothing additional there. As we talked previously, I think we're looking at evaluating whether or not we can take different mitigations to protect the site from flooding in the future. And so as we continue to do that, at the end of the decommissioning, you actually have to go in and do site characterization. The NRC will come in and confirm that. So this will be an ongoing process as we go through the decommissioning. Things like as we're moving equipment in and out, we want to make sure we didn't track anything anywhere. Obviously, that's never supposed to happen, but you know, we just will continuously do this in order to characterize the external part of the building. This really was focused more on the internal part of the building.
And that's the internal, we did a little bit of that.
Well, but after the flood in 11,
In 11 we did.
part of the NRC requirement was to do a characterization of the geotechnical underneath the reactor and auxiliary building to verify there were no significant voids or related issues, which there
Or
weren't.
structural.
That was
Exactly,
mainly
more
structural. That was
yeah.
structural rather than radiological.
Based on the startup, right? So
Right.
that was after, or before we could start up, we had to do the
Structural analysis to ensure the integrity of the ground underneath.
So you're doing this is sort of gonna be a baseline for you too, that you're gonna be able to use, because as I remember with the decommissioning people that were here yesterday, they said that's something that you really have to be careful of and to check on as far as radiological contamination, moving the stuff out.
Yep.
So,
And so that's what I mean by the characterization will continue. It's an ongoing
Okay.
process. We'll monitor everything as we go forward. We're very cognizant, very aware of ensuring that we maintain control of all of our waste streams to ensure that we have no cross-contamination going forward. So extra precautions are taken, the way that we move packages, the way that we actually put them in the packages, all very specialized. And that's really why we brought in our partnership with the Energy Solutions. That is their forte. That's what they've done at other sites. They have the waste burial site in Clive, Utah, where much of this waste is gonna go. They have regulatory requirements on shipping that they need to maintain. And so we're working hand in hand with them to make sure that we maintain control over each and every one of our packages appropriately.
So, Mary, appreciate that innovation on that. How did you identify this contractor? Was this part of our Energy Solutions connection that allowed us to
It is.
find that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I should have
Yeah.
said that. Energy Solutions did bring in this innovative way to do it. And they were the ones that told us previously it had taken them months and they were very frustrated by the length of time. And went out and did a research out in the industry to figure out if there were other techniques that we could use to do this. So it has really brought a lot of innovation into the thinking about how to move the decommissioning forward. And they're working with us. There are other things that we've gone out and researched that we've brought in, and it's really great to see the two teams working really well together.
I like that partnership. It's working really well.
Thank you.
Mary, from the first bullet in your report, can you remind us of the timeline for the remaining canisters, the total number, and where that's going? I'm not sure if that was coming or.
Just gonna get to that. So thank you. In terms of basket insertions at the facility in, I don't know, North Carolina, South Carolina, I always forget. 17 of the 30 are complete. 9 have been shipped to Fort Calhoun. So we have 6 inserted, the 7th one that we're working on. We have 2 extra at the site. We're anticipating sometime last week of December, first week of January to have 3 more on site. So those are coming. We have two additional canisters on site and then hoping to broaden that out to 5 by the first of the year. I would say that the manufacturer that's been working on these, we've had struggles with that. We're seeing them really work towards trying to get a canister a week. Sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes we end up getting, 2 in the following week because one of them gets, has a bump in the road. But in general, I would say they're working pretty effectively with us. We are continuing to go out and visit them. There are people out there doing this week, making sure that the manufacturing is going as appropriate. So we'll continue to be out there until all the canisters are delivered to Fort Calhoun.
And so the total number there is 30?
30, yeah.
And so
30 for the fuel, and then we'll get 2 additional for high-level radioactive.
And then the canister arrival here is not currently going to cause any kind of a shift in the schedule. Sounds like we've got 2 more ready and more coming, and so that isn't a time constraint we expect?
Not currently, but that is something that we continue to work with them on to make sure that we don't get a time constraint on that. Really with an eye towards the spring, if we get into flooding and we can't get the mitigation that we want in place before flooding would occur in the spring, if it does occur, then we want to make sure that we're ahead of schedule as opposed to behind schedule so that we can make up the time later.
And then lastly, the time to have all of the canisters on the pad, is there a deadline now or an expected completion date for that now?
Correct. Expected to be in June of 2020.
So then the potential events outside of our control in the spring would be a consideration for work schedule then?
Absolutely. It's always something that we pay attention to, and as I said, much of our work we're trying to get ahead on so that we don't interfere with the schedule later on, really with our eye towards June of 2020 to have that fuel movement complete.
Great, thank you.
Hey, Mary, can you talk about when you go to visit a producer of these, checking quality control and those other things? Is there someone else or just our folks or who's all watching that?
It is our folks, but it's different folks, right? So from Tim Euling, who you've seen in here many times, will go out and talk to their vice president. I've been out there to talk to their president, ensuring that they're doing the manufacturing appropriately and that they're gonna meet our schedules. Excuse me. And then this week, we have our quality assurance folks going out. Early in January, we're gonna have our head of quality assurance going out there to make sure that they're doing it. Excuse me. As well as our plant manager will be going out in January.
When you say quality assurance, a lot of that is documentation, correct? To make sure that not only is it the physical part of it, but also the documentation has to be correct. And the idea that 50, 60 years from now, we have to have everything correct as far as documentation for each canister, and each one is separate and each one's unique.
And each one of those packages can be 800 to 1,000 pages. And so we review those. I think we talked about that. As each canister is utilized, we make sure that all the paperwork is in place. We're hoping to start getting that paperwork before we get the canisters. That has not happened to date. That's what we're working with the manufacturer on, going out there and talking to them about, can we get the paperwork to make sure that when we have the canister on site, that it's ready to use. So that's kind of the improvements that we're trying to make with them. We're walking through, what can we do on our side, what can they do on their side?
Well, more of a curiosity follow-up than anything else. So how far in the future are we keeping those records?
Until we put it someplace else.
Until DOE comes to retrieve the fuel and take it to the monitor.
So how many revisions in format are we going through? So it's hard copy plus.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting.
That was interesting to hear at the DOC last exit meeting. I was like, paperwork? What? But they really underscored how critical this paperwork was.
Yeah.
It kind of blew me away.
It's like chain of custody.
Yeah,
Exactly.
And the thing about that is the paperwork needs to be in order or DOE will not take that canister.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're very, very critical eye on that to make sure that the paperwork is appropriate and that it will lend itself to where we can get it shipped off to the DOE facility when that's ready.
We're very thankful that you and the crew are working on this.
Thank you. Just a few more things I wanted to talk about our quality assurance folks and what they've been doing. They continue to say that there's positive performance, especially around, I will talk a little bit about, we had a problem with our auxiliary building crane. This is the crane that moves the fuel from the fuel storage, from the pool into the bay area where we will put the canister and actually load it into the canister and roll it out and then take it over to this facility. We'll put it on what's called a crawler, a tugger crawler. We had a problem with that crane. That crane, as they said earlier this week, is an antique. You can't find the parts for it. Nobody knows how to use it. It's a very old crane, and the team spent 10 days troubleshooting that crane to try to figure out how to get it to where it would operate appropriately. And so, of note, the quality assurance folks saying it was very positive, and they did conservative decision making about holding off moving any fuel until that crane, we assured ourselves, was operable, ready to move fuel. So again, things that we're doing internally that I just wanted to share. I know one of the comments coming out of the DOC meeting was to be a little more specific about what's going on. Other things, as I said, we're still visiting transnuclear out in Greensboro. So that continues to go on. A couple things about internal assessments that our nuclear oversight folks have done. They did a fourth quarter assessment from October 1st through November 20th. They looked at the pool to pad support. They assessed areas through in-field observations, interviews, procedures, and other document reviews. They observed the security, the rigging, the lifting, the radiation protection, the welding, the non-destructive examination, and the transport of the canisters. And they assessed that they had 5 deficiencies and 2 enhancements. So the team is working on those. What can we do to improve? So this is the part of the continuous improvement that we're doing as we're moving fuel. They also did a second assessment from October 10th to November 4th. They went and evaluated our new Fitness for Duty program through CHI Health. So we switched that over. The areas that they looked at were Fitness for Duty, drug and alcohol testing requirements, and their guide for implementation. They found 2 deficiencies which they've discussed, and they have made the determination that they're in the process of becoming operational and they'll be good going forward. So I wanted to share that as well.
Any other questions for the Nuclear Oversight Committee report?
Thank you for the additional level of detail.
Right, with that, the report is complete.
Okay. Next, we have governance. Oh, public information. We have
Yeah.
a report on public information.
Public information, we did not meet, however, thank you for giving me some space on the agenda to provide a couple updates because there were a handful of emails that went back and forth that I want to update everyone on. There are a few things that we have in the works that we just kind of weren't ready to have a meeting on. We're expecting some things in January, so that list includes, and these are for the most part reminders for everyone. One is, in November, we had a discussion about the role of directors in outreach efforts, something that Director Williams flagged is he was doing a lot of outreach for Power with Purpose. Senior management needs a little bit more time to gather more information prior to a PI discussion, so we expect to have something in January for our first committee meeting. We're getting a nod from Scott, so we're still on track there. The next, going all the way back to our workshop in July, potential revisions to BL9. As a reminder, BL9 is about the delegation that the board provides to senior management for legislative duties. The team has done a little bit of research on other utilities. They're planning to obtain additional information from Eric Douglas, LPPC, and APPA. That information will be combined with some research the team is doing with constituent communication efforts, since those are some of the same individuals and entities. This is not ready for discussion in December either, so we're probably looking at January for maybe the first discussion there. So that will be good. The next item that we electronically discussed was doing a little bit of a debrief on SD13 after Power with Purpose and some of the comments that were made at the last board meeting, we thought it would be a good idea for us to kind of step back and say, okay, let's have a discussion about this and what, if anything, needs to be done. SD 13 is our public engagement strategic directive. And as a reminder, we just voted on compliance with that last month. So again, anticipated PI discussion in January there. Let's make sure we schedule enough time for that meeting. And then the last that's forthcoming is the unicameral is going to start getting together in January. So I believe it's a short session, is that right?
Very short, yes, 60-day session.
60-day session, so we'll probably just kind of get sort of the precursor, or the preview of what we anticipate the work to be at our January PI committee meeting. Seth just had a baby, or his wife had a baby, I should say, so.
They
had a child.
An adorable child too.
Yeah, so we're gonna give him a little space, but then come January, I think we'll get a quick update. Any quick questions?
Following on some discussions that we've had, we had been talking about different rates through the PI committee, but from here forward, we expect that to move to the finance committee for ongoing discussion, is that right? Okay, thank you, appreciate the clarification there. And then there was one additional that we hadn't really talked that much about, but it was a previous kind of rate-related discussion, and I guess, Julie, maybe this is you, on the Green Power Program. We had previously talked about a potential update during Q1 of 2020. Is that still something we would be expecting? And if so, do we expect that to be a report to PI or a report over to finance related to administrative updates on that rate rider?
I would say it depends on how it's gonna change, if it's gonna change. So if it's related to the program itself, then it would probably just go through PI. But if it requires board action on the rate, then it would go through finance.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you for those questions, Director Williams. Anybody else? Okay. That's it, yeah.
Okay, now we've got governance pre-committee meetings. Mr. Kavanaugh, if you can.
The committee met on December 5th, discussed several items, including the items we discussed earlier in executive session and the items we discussed today. In addition to those items, one of them is, give everyone a heads up, we'll soon be receiving the board's annual self-assessment evaluation.
Committee reports first. And then you can rename. Correct? We'll have committee reports and then also self-assessment.
Yes,
In January.
yes, I'm working on the committee reports right now.
Okay, all right. We also discussed issues with the consent agenda we've been using, and we brought those up earlier in today's meeting to see if we're using it appropriately, if there's ways to improve it and so forth. And we also had discussion, and I'm going to turn this over to Scott, concerning the sign-in process at our board meetings. With the issues with the reconstruction of the main floor there and so forth. We've kind of gone back and forth a little bit. Scott's going to go ahead and kind of show us where we're standing and the reason for the changes, I guess.
Yeah,
Scott?
thank you, Director Kavanaugh. And I guess what I wanted to highlight is there was some confusion, there's been some operational changes. As you're aware, when you come into this building now, there's been increased security put into the building, and how we badge in is different. Through that process, there were some operational challenges that presented themselves as we were inviting other people into our building. That created some confusion over the past few months. What we have done is we have reverted back to the process that we used prior to any of our changes in terms of public coming in and being attending the meeting and then speaking. It is important that when public is speaking that we have an identification of those individuals, because that information does go into public record. So that's something that we always want to make sure that we're able to appropriately identify people that are speaking. But otherwise, it's going back and reverting to the process that we've had in the past. There may be some future enhancements as we continue to think about that in the future that very much align with obviously the legislative considerations that we have that guide how we handle public meetings. So I don't know if there's anything else that you'd like to add at this point, Kate, because it's
Scott,
really.
maybe just clarify what it was going back, so there's some clarity around that.
What we have now, what do we expect now?
Well, and I will still put the spotlight on over to Kate, because really it's her team that manages the process.
So the process for coming in is really, there's a sheet and we just ask that the name be printed on the sheet. That's all we're asking for as they come in. To Scott's point, that allows us to provide to Mo so that when they speak at the board meeting, that we can have that name and then Mo can enter it into the record. So it's a very simple process, just printing the name of the individual. That's all we're requesting them to do as they come into the building.
Name and address, just name,
That's only if they speak.
Only if they speak. So at that point, we're only asking for their name, their full name, first and last name.
And we had some discussion too, as far as, when people speak at the meetings, and I always wondered also, why do we get the name and address? And most pointed out that due to the clarity sometimes, trying to get the minutes as accurate as possible, it's kind of necessary to have that person's address and also.
Correct.
That is
reflected and that is reflected in the official record of the meeting, in the minutes of the meeting.
It's certainly not to intimidate or discourage anyone from.
Well, if anything, it might be for better communication if
Sure.
we need to communicate back with them.
The other thing I would add is that each person also gets a visitor badge with the neck piece and then a visitor marking on that badge. It's the other piece I just wanted to add to that. So that when they're in the building, we know that they're a visitor in the building.
And I should have asked that too. Do we have any difficulty retrieving these badges?
It's a good process. Like to Scott's point, I think we just had some challenges in terms of making operational changes. We also have guards that come in and out of those roles at different times, so they didn't get all the information at once. So it was just clearly an operational glitch that we had that I think we've now addressed fully.
And the thing that's a little bit different here is that this is a secured building, whereas a lot of places where we have open meeting, where a lot of other governmental entities have open meetings, it's not secured. And I believe that's what Javier mentioned earlier in the corporate operating plan. They're thinking of perhaps having a space that might be more open as far as better for security. Is that what you're thinking?
Yes, it will be still a secure entry point because this building, to your point, Director McGuire, this is a building that also houses employees for the work that they do. Whereas if you're in a public space, that's not the same type of environment, so it'll be different. We'll maintain the security that we have. The idea being that the space that we are in up here today on the 9th floor, we would move down to a lower floor, so we don't have people traversing the different floors in the building, but keeping it all on that one floor in the area that Javier was indicating, which is down, there's a lot of conference rooms down on that floor, 3 or 4 of them. We would be renovating that area and creating a space that this meeting and other meetings could be held in on that floor, so we don't have this movement throughout the building, which creates more security challenges whenever you move people more.
Something that just comes to my mind, is Fraser Stryker the only tenant we have in this building?
Outside of the credit union.
Do folks that come to the law firm for personal business, can they check in at the front desk? Do they have free access to go to the office, or do they have to be escorted, or how's that work?
You're escorted?
We are escorted.
Usually by our people, yeah.
Where do they enter?
Typically.
16th, either door, or
17th Street side.
17th Street now is where their official entrance is.
And if I can just highlight, the point of the discussion was to ensure that there was some clarity around how the process works. It's intended to make it easy for people to come to meetings, to participate in meetings, and to make sure that we have accuracy in terms of the official record of those meetings and who's presented. But because there was some confusion, we felt it was important as a committee to have that level of discussion and to re-clarify the process. And that was all that was intended by that discussion.
And we will, for clarity's sake, post that on OPPD.com so that the public will have that.
And this obviously won't require any board action, so. Okay, we have two actual,
We had, can I mention one other thing? We did do a brief review, I had asked to do a brief review of the many changes that we have had in our committee structure this past year. And would perhaps like some feedback from the rest of the groups. One of the major things we did is we merged nuclear with systems. And that enabled us, I think it's enabling us to have 4 people on each committee rather than 3. So that was one thing that I would, I'll go through these and then if anybody wants to bring them up. So that we now have 4 committees with 4 people on each of those committees. As far as rates, we move rates from public information to finance. And the other thing with, as far as finance, we split up the audit, the general audit versus the financial audit. The general audit now goes to governance, and the finance, external finance still stays in finance. Is that correct, Scott? Can you
Yeah,
answer
so
that?
just at a high level, there's a 3-year risk-based corporate audit plan that's developed that includes areas beyond finance. I think it's important for those reviews that pertain to a particular committee to be reviewed within that committee. So the financial audits would be reviewed within the finance committee as we develop and identify others that there could be a review and systems committee or other committees as it pertains to specific audit findings should that be warranted. So this allows us to move the oversight of audit into the most into governance, which is perhaps the most umbrella committee, if you will, over all of the business of the board.
So I don't know if there's any feedback from the other members that weren't in the governance, if they have any feedback on those changes.
I think we've been, pretty good to actually have that 4th person, especially you get busy and now we can make a meeting or something, you still get more ears and thought process going into it. So I like that first move that you did.
seems to work.
Yeah, I think there was consensus on the committee that it was working
Right.
well. I think we also specifically mentioned the fact that when one person can't attend, it's nice to open it up to somebody else. Like when I attended systems, that was great.
And thank you, Mo, for coordinating that.
Facilitating that, yeah. No, that's it.
The other thing that I did mention is that in previous history, we have had committees, as much as possible, have committees and also the executive board have tried to have 2-year terms to work together, or at least to have as many people on the same committee as the next year. And an example is right now in our committees, there's a lot of work being done as far as in each of the committees. And next year, as far as structure and stability, to sort of, everyone should keep that in mind as far as trying to keep, whoever is chair or whatever. But it used to be that the chair would have almost like 2-year terms. It didn't always work like that because somebody would, transfer out, somebody would not, transfer out, they might have died or they might have, just decided not to run again, that type of thing. So just to think about that, because there's a lot of changes going on as far as people moving in and out, and as far as the electoral system, people may not be running next year, that type of thing, as far as looking at stability rather than try to mix up the whole mash.
And on that one, especially with the sub-district design now,
Yeah.
it used to be everyone was at large and there's maybe more stability. But now with sub-districts, there's been a lot more changes.
Far more
going
churn,
on. So
yes.
you don't have the long 24-year board members or anything. So the 2-year cycle, election cycle coinciding might make some sense, but what it's
Just to
worth,
think about it, yeah.
it's a fairly recent change.
Yeah.
Even when we had the 2-year cycle, you still had the elections every year.
There's still a change, definitely.
Right, or there could have been change if necessary. It's either way. The other issue as far as committee structure remaining the same, that's obviously up to the chair if they want
It's
to
up
keep
to the
the
chair,
committee,
and that's why I mentioned it.
The
As a
exception
whole,
being
that
obviously-
people have, as far as stability of what's going on in each of the
but the
committees.
exception being obviously whoever the treasurer is, the chair finance.
Right.
And obviously the
Governance committee.
governance committee chaired by the outgoing chair.
Think about that.
Okay. Go ahead. Well, one more change though has been now with 4 people on there, on each committee. And I think you're getting a lot more information than you used to. With only 3 on the committee, But I guess where I'm going with that, our format is much better to share information,
Yes.
I think. So
Thank you for
it's not
that.
like you're missing out on much. I'm not in that committee.
Yeah.
It just seems somehow we're exchanging information pretty good is all I'm saying. So whether it's a year or two, I don't think we bounce around that much, but.
Yeah, I'll double down on that. I think when we came on board, the structure was not intentional to, as much as possible, for information that doesn't need to be discussed in committee, that information be moved out to the board as a whole. So that's been really good. And so overall, I think the structure of the committee is good. I would encourage that we reflect on the opportunity for board members to have experience in as many committees as possible and not to
Right.
get necessarily locked into the same two.
No, well, I think at least to stay in one, and that would be up to the chair to discuss that with that person.
So institutional knowledge, I think, is valuable, and so it's good to have some longevity in some, but we also need to reflect on the operations of the organization as a whole.
Yeah, I think you're right on.
Right. Okay. Okay, Mike.
We have two items you see on our agenda for today. The first one is the review of SD8 safe and compliant. And I'm going to turn that over to Mark, who deals with employee relations monitoring.
Good afternoon. All right, SD8, as you'll recall, we made some revisions to it just a couple of months ago. And so this is a modified policy. Basically, we are required to maintain a diverse and inclusive workplace responsive of our core values. It engages and inspires employees to commit to the vision and mission of OPPD. And we establish a goal to achieve top quartile performance in employee engagement for similar sized companies. And we'll go through each of these bulleted items individually. Before I do that, I wanted to address the diverse and inclusive workplace piece of this SD. OPPD is making slow but steady progress on becoming more diverse. Today, we have increased representation by people of color by 3% over 2017, and we've increased female representation by 1%. However, we recognized in 2017 that it was likely that we were going to have to build more diverse talent for our pipeline, and we launched a program that you've heard a little bit about called Legacy I3. So I wanted to give you an update on that. The Legacy I3 program provides us with a low-cost, sustainable method of developing local diverse talent into viable candidates for employment. It was established in September of 2017. We have had 51 high school seniors enrolled in the program in cohort 1 in 2017 and cohort 2 in 2018. 90% graduated from the program. 76% of those are currently enrolled in college, a majority at Metropolitan Community College or the University of Nebraska. 85% interned in the summer of 2019, and 50% are currently working for us part-time. Cohort 3 just started in September, and we have 18 seniors enrolled in that program. And the mix has been about 50% male, 50% female, pretty close to that.
Mark, how do you choose that cohort? How is the cohort selected?
So they do, the individuals who are interested in the program, we go to the schools, explain the program. Individuals who are interested do have to submit applications, and they do go through an interview process to be selected.
So is it teachers and everything that tells the students about this, or how does that work?
So our staff does that.
The staff does it?
Yeah. I will say that most of the guidance counselors that we've been, for the schools that we've been working with, are very appreciative of the program and also share it with their students.
That's right.
OPPD also has some very active employee resource groups. We currently have 6, and we're getting prepared to launch 2 more. We have a women's network, a Society of Engineers, a Latino society, Veterans Network, an African American network, and a Young Professionals group. We're getting ready to launch an LGBTQ+ allies program and a Global Connections program that will be focused on immigrants and refugees. These groups provide ongoing learning opportunities for their members. They regularly have lunch and learn sessions, bring in outside speakers, those kinds of things. And they live OPPD's core values by regularly honoring their communities. participating in the Cinco de Mayo parade, the Pride Parade, the Veterans Parade, those kinds of things, and representing OPPD there, as well as doing various charitable activities like providing baskets for Food Bank of the Heartland and things like that. So one of our bulleted items is to engage the workforce in personal and professional development. And internally, OPPD has chosen to have few internal training programs, but ensure that those we offer are of very high quality. So for new programs, we did this year an individual development plans workshop to help people understand how they can build more robust development plans and working with their supervisor or manager. We had a career planning workshop to help them think about what the next steps of their career might be. And we also provided a more robust leader onboarding and development program. So as people are moving into leadership positions, either externally or internally, we want to make sure that they're onboarded properly. We have some targeted and sponsored development programs that we've talked about before. The accelerated leadership development programs for levels 3 and 2 in our organization. So those are 18 to 24 month programs that our individuals go through to help them get prepared to work at the next level of work in our organization. We launched Crew Leader University. We're going through a pilot right now, and we'll launch fully in 2020. And what that's really designed to do is provide folks who are going to be working crew leaders for us with some leadership training and really understand what the change in their role is going to be. So you can imagine, yesterday I was a member of the crew, tomorrow I'm leading that crew. We want to make sure that they have really good, robust training to do that. This was also an opportunity in working with our union partners to really think about how we could make sure that we're getting the best individuals into the roles and doing that and honoring their seniority. So in this program, if people are successful in passing the program, then they will be considered for these positions by seniority. So that was a change that we made in working with the union. We have done 2 programs in line with our diversity and inclusion work that have really driven some very robust, difficult, emotional discussion at OPPD, but are helping us to learn how to be better partners together in diversity work. One is the Gathering for People of Color and the Gathering for Women, and the other is White Men as Full Diversity Partners, which we started the week before Thanksgiving. And we'll be rolling that through as well. Developing the leadership framework, so you've heard quite a bit about our leadership framework. We have it for levels 2 through 5 at this point. We have developed the behaviors for level 1, and we will begin working on how we're going to roll that out to the organization. Again, this was a great partnership with a lot of folks in the union to build these behaviors, and we're excited to get those rolled out.
Mark, can you tell just the time frame for the people who are listening? When you started the leadership framework, how many years ago was that? Because I believe this was your baby.
2.5 years ago.
2.5 years ago. You've done a lot of work on that. Kudos to that.
Thank you. So externally, we have people that participate in a number of different kinds of learning opportunities. These are some of the ones that we sponsor as an organization. So we have a partnership with the ICANN group, which is the Institute for Career and Advancement Needs. And we work with them. We put people through their Emerging Leaders program, through Defining Leadership for Women and Defining Leadership for Men. Those are good programs. We also have people that are participating regularly in Leadership Nebraska, Leadership Omaha, the Omaha Executive Institute, which I'm doing this year, Redefine the Game through the Empowerment Network, the Propel Supervisor Series through a group called Mindset. We've also had a couple people attend the Utility Management Certificate Program at Willamette University, which will give people who are in level 3 roles a more broad understanding of the overall industry. And then we launched in September the Lead Diversity for Omaha. That was in partnership with the Business Ethics Alliance, the Omaha Chamber of Commerce, and Inclusive Communities. And it's a program that we brought from Cleveland, Ohio, that is a 10-month leadership experience solely focused on how to lead to be more diverse and inclusive.
And Mark, just to verify, it was OPPD that has brought this to the city and to the community.
Correct.
So again, kudos for that.
Thank you. In addition to these external programs, our employees often attend conferences and seminars in their areas of functional expertise. We also have technical training that is run in the organization, as Kevin mentioned. We do not in human capital track those, and we are working on getting a more robust system to allow us to be able to track all of the training across the organization. And we also have 62 employees that are taking college classes through our tuition reimbursement program. To maintain and communicate written policies defining our procedures and expectations for staff and provide for effective handling of grievances. Our collective bargaining agreements with the locals spell out procedures and expectations for bargaining unit staff and provide for a 3-step procedure for handling grievances. We maintain corporate policies and procedures, an employee handbook, and a safety manual, all of which outline expectations and procedures for staff and are available for employees to review on the OPPD intranet. Policy 3.01 is our code of business conduct and outlines many of the same things that are covered in the board's code of conduct. Employees receive annual training on the code, and employees complete a questionnaire to help us identify any potential issues across the organization. To date, no major issues have been reported. Everyone that is reported is investigated and resolved. So there's been nothing of a major nature reported in those. A third-party external reporting system called Ethics Point is available for all employees to anonymously report potential issues. Internal complaints are filed formally through the employee's supervisor or directly to Human Capital. And depending on the subject of the report or complaint, these issues are investigated by Human Capital, internal audit, security, or outside legal counsel. And the reporter receives notification that the item has been investigated and an explanation of the nature of the action taken. The number of complaints we've had filed has leveled off and has been fairly steady for the last several years. We fairly regularly get somewhere between 19 and 25. External complaints are filed through an external process such as the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the Nebraska Equal Opportunity Commission, or a legal claim. Bargain in good faith with the official agents of represented employees and comply with collective bargaining agreements. Labor and management reached agreement on all 3 collective bargaining agreements in 2017, and those agreements will expire May 31st of 2022. Our labor relations group works with the 3 locals throughout the year to negotiate many memoranda and letters of understanding on various topics that arise for which clear language does not appear in the collective bargaining agreements. Also, since 2017, Labor and Management have been meeting regularly with our benefits group and our benefits consultant to drive clearer understanding of the benefits that are provided, how they are used, and how costs are incurred. And beginning in 2018, Labor Relations and Safety have hosted quarterly meetings with union leadership to discuss overall safety trends and issues with members of senior management. We provide training for supervisors on the leadership framework behaviors, human capital processes, and how to administer the collective bargaining agreements. And a labor management update report was provided to the board in November. Conduct an annual engagement survey and provide a report of the results to the board. So results were presented to the board of our latest engagement survey in August. And action plans for improving engagement are in place and are being executed across the company. Our overall score was 79.8. We had agreement on, I think, 55 of the 57 items on the survey that improved significantly. And just for reference, to be top quartile in similar sized companies in 2019, we would have had to hit 83.4. And then to provide an annual report to the board on OPPD's affirmative action plan. A full report on the affirmative action plan was provided to the board in October. We do have goals for those 4 locations as well as for individuals with disabilities that we are working on. We are required to make good faith efforts to remedy those goals. We have optimized our sourcing strategy. We're using LinkedIn very, very heavily to go out and try and find the talent that we need for the organization. We're also working through several different workforce development opportunities with Heartland Workforce Solutions, the legacy program, some of those types of programs. We have people in the organization that are serving on the AIM board for IT, people that are in the Tech Talent Initiative for the chamber, et cetera. The high impact D&I training that I talked about is moving the needle on some of the conversations we're having in the organization. And I'm proud to tell you that 10 out of the folks that have gone through the gatherings, the first 4 cohorts, so probably around 40-some people, 10 of those have been promoted over this year. So we're happy to see that. And then our employee value proposition, we are working very closely with Lisa's group and the communications team on how we can better advertise for OPPD in the talent space. So we'll be making some improvements on that going forward. And Governance Committee reviewed the report and recommends OPPD to be sufficiently in compliance with SDA. Questions?
Does anyone have any concerns as far as whether we're in compliance or not? If not, we'll be voting on it Thursday.
Okay.
Janice?
I don't have any concerns, but awesome work. But on maintain and communicate written policies that define procedures and expectations for staff for handling grievances. I mean, so do we take that a step further? I mean, handling grievances is one thing, but then analyzing trends and working on corrective actions that address those enterprise-wide. Is that part of this SD, or is that, does it need to be part of this SD? I mean, because handling the grievances individually is great, but analyzing them and then taking corrective actions.
So it is not specifically laid out in here, but we do, whenever we have any kind of an arbitration, those arbitration decisions are discussed with management about what we need to do differently going forward. As we're looking at grievances, when we have trends, so I will give you an example. One of the trends we had from grievances was seniority bypass on working crew leader. What we did in response to that was to develop Crew Leader University and develop a new process. The ethics point complaints that come in are regularly reviewed on a quarterly basis by an ethics oversight committee, and they look for trends and for things that we need to change as an organization as a result of that. So it is built into our processes, not necessarily written in the SD.
Would it be helpful to have, I don't know, the rest of the board? Is that something that we need to, is that something we need to have in this SD, I guess is?
I think that's something you probably, if you would see even unsubstantiated or unfounded complaints filed in one direction, I would imagine that would still be somewhat alarming to you, right? If you saw a number of them, even if they weren't sustained or totally on the field, you'd still look at them and with a little bit more closer eye, I would assume, right? Than if you didn't have these concerns voiced. So I'm assuming it's already going on. I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer. That would be something that common sense should be being done, I imagine. So
Yeah, I mean, I would think it would be up to the board if you want it written into the SD, that's fine.
Yeah. So are you kind of asking Director Mulhoff for numbers? I mean, how many?
No, I wasn't really, I was just
Or trends of numbers?
wondering if we need to take it a step further.
Identify any trends. You're saying add a statement or something.
Well, I would say, here's what I would say about the trends. I mean, I think it's inherent in here. I think it could be, as we begin to think about future monitoring reports, we could just identify the trend identification on the monitoring report without having a specific identification as understood. But I think one of the things we saw in the engagement survey was around recognition and accountability. And we very clearly had 2 executive sponsors, I believe Javier and Julie, that identified, a team was identified for them to work with to come back with kind of system-wide recommendations around recognition and around accountability. That would be an example of the trends that we identify in the engagement survey. And so, I mean, that is done. I think if the board desires for us to report on it, that's something we can report on and just take it from here without having to have a section of trend identification in it, which I think is the how, but we can certainly take that in the future without that.
I don't, it's all good. I'm not pushing for any kind of change. Kinds of questions I can imagine are for like internal and external complaints. Are they managed successfully? Do they have to go to third party? You know, that kind of thing. And are those trending up or down? But, so, right. And so to what end? Is this still a good place to work? And so you've got other measures for that.
Yeah, and I'm happy to share this.
And the number of external and internal complaints have been relatively stable last couple of years.
Yeah, we have not had a lot of external complaints, and thanks to our legal partners, we've generally prevailed in those complaints.
And the only reason why they become third party in many cases is that we don't believe there were issues that were stemmed from that to begin with, that we've done the investigation and someone says, well, I don't agree with you, I want to go to a third party and do that. And again, there's a separate investigation that occurs, and many times it's concurred that you're right, we didn't do anything wrong and we followed the process and did all the right things.
When we refer to third party, like arbitration, something like that.
Yeah, it could be like, well, the,
Arbitration or legal counsel through the NEOC.
Right.
Director Williams, did you have a question?
Yep, comments actually. In addition to the ongoing success of the Legacy I3 program, that's wonderful. But starting with the Lead Diversity program, another great accomplishment. So thanks for focusing on that. And then I had the opportunity to attend the Urban League Equal Opportunity Day luncheon last Friday with some members of staff. And congratulations to staff on being awarded the Diversity and Inclusion Champion Award. That's wonderful. It's great recognition for all the work that's been going on in those programs and others. And then following on the comment earlier about comments on consent agenda items, if I wanted to repeat that accolade on Thursday, is that something that is acceptable during a consent agenda item or no?
No. It's black or white.
Okay.
Well, if you want to.
It might be mentioned in the president.
Consent
It might,
agenda.
if you want to comment
Make
in
things more
public.
confusing, but
Make it confusing.
it's recorded now, so kudos to you and the entire team on the wonderful work and the award
Hopefully that will
last
be in
week.
the president's report.
I'm sure it is.
Yes.
I'm sure it is. Really, I'm sure it is. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm sure it is.
You don't ride that
I
person.
want to ride his coattails of kudos. I think it's really easy for us to get wrapped up in, SD7s and power with purpose and nuclear, like all this stuff. But the reality is our people generate all this work, right? Like this SD, it's easy to just kind of let it fade into the background, but it's easy to do that because we're doing a pretty darn good job. I want to double down on the D&I work. I'm really proud of the fact that we are a leader in the community on that front. Thank you for that work. I always like the fact that this SD calls out us to both personally and professionally develop people. People will come and work for us for a while, but then they're going to go somewhere else. And I like the thought that we're kind of cultivating great people. I like the fact that it seems, my perception is that we have a really good relationship with the labor unions today as well, a great productive professional relationship, and I think that's well reflected in here. And obviously the engagement survey results, I don't know if that's true, we can talk about it later.
Guys, I don't know.
He winked at me, so.
But the engagement survey is really, that's the litmus test for all this stuff, and it rolls right up. And I think the amount of transition that we're going through as an organization while maintaining and improving our engagement scores is phenomenal. So kudos to everyone on that. This is a really strong part of who we are.
Takes a team effort. Got great colleagues, so thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay, our final.
If I could just, and Mark, this is a comment about how things work, I guess. So I appreciate that the recognition that you just highlighted, that OPPD has a leadership position, and that the rock in the pond, the ripples travel far and wide. I think that's true for many things, including how we choose to encourage customer adoption of energy efficiency kind of thing. I mean, it's absolutely, it's an important, OPPD is an important part of the community, and that's experienced in a lot of the programs that we have. That's all.
Okay, our final item is the agenda planning calendar. Tim, you're gonna handle that?
Yeah, I think.
We didn't handle this.
Go ahead, Scott.
Sure. Just as part of the board policy GP4 agenda planning, is that in December of each year, the board shall develop an annual work plan comprised of topics and issues it wishes to explore as required to address in the coming year, in order to guide staff in preparing agendas for standing committee meetings and regular board committee meetings. What you find attached is that agenda as it currently stands. As you know, the agendas themselves are quite dynamic. So to start a year off with the thought of what you're going to accomplish over 2020 is a daunting task. I want to thank Mo for her leadership in pulling this together based upon the types of decisions and things that we make throughout the course of the year. The agenda then is reviewed on a 90-day basis, so things can be updated on that as well to bring it more current still, and then of course on a monthly basis. So this is a dynamic process, but really what you see in front of you is based upon best knowledge of what we know, and certainly hope that this would be a reflection of what you as a board would at least initially see as being the agenda aspects of plan for 2020. And really, this is just a reporting item at this moment to say, yes, we have pulled it together, we have given that some thought, and this is what that agenda plan looks like today.
As far as the SDs, we had a discussion previously about whether or not we need every SD to be discussed every year.
Yes.
Have you prioritized these SDs in this year?
SDs are.
There are some SDs that we are not going to be discussing next year. Are we going to be discussing every single one?
We intend to discuss every SD throughout the course of the year, and they're all scheduled as such to be reviewed throughout the year. It's, I think, perhaps the most important monitoring that we do. There are some additional conversations around GP policies as well as BL. If you remember in 2019, what the governance committee did was establish that retreat. And the question came to the board really to take a look at those broadly, and are there any that don't currently reflect or warrant additional refinements or changes, which is kind of a broad approach to be able to surface if anything needs to be addressed or changed across those policies. And then that would lead to a prioritization of those policies that should be reviewed and refined. The same thing would happen with regards to SDs. If we do it again in 2020, the goal will be to have a retreat, have that survey, understand where the board is in terms of are there refinements to be made to any of these policies, and then prioritize work accordingly. Because I think as you've all come to know through the course of this process, to take one of the SDs or any one of the policies for that matter and to refine it does actually take some significant time and effort. So to really create a prioritized focus on that is important, and that would be built into, again, an annual retreat process.
Scott helps me out a lot, helps us all out a lot, and I think the world of him does a great job. I disagree with him on this a little bit. Something to throw out here, something maybe we can think about. Do we need to review these SDs every year, or should they be reviewed only when a director wishes to possibly make a change to it?
So just a point of clarification,
SDs versus BLs.
SDs get reviewed from a monitoring perspective annually. From an in-compliance, but what you're asking about is from a revision standpoint.
Well, I'm sorry, even monitored. We don't monitor the US Constitution every year. I mean, not to compare the two, but you know what I'm saying? If someone has an issue with a particular SD, then the director should bring up the concern, or if management has a concern, they can address it with the committee chair of that particular SD. I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah.
In order to give the, I don't want to say dignity, but to give the respect to that SD, a lot of time goes into molding that. let it stand the test of time a little bit. Don't, I don't know, I don't think we need to be reviewing it every year. What do you guys think? Think about it, kick it around. It's just my thought.
So I think it goes to your comment, is what I'm hearing from you though, Mike, is not the monitoring, i.e. that there's an annual report out of performance. What I hear your concern more is, do we tweak it every year?
No, I heard both actually.
Yeah, I don't know what he's talking about.
That's my question.
And again, if someone has concerns that management is not in compliance with it, bring it to our attention and we can address it.
Well, I think it's a good point, because I kind of had the same question as you did about from the retreat, did we identify some that we don't necessarily need to dig into in the same way annually? I also, your framing is interesting partly because I'm not sure how I as a board member would know that a problem was arising. Just kind of through the course of doing the work that we do about an SD. So I tend to think that to me, when I talk to the public, one of the things that I talk about is the most important thing that we do as directors is set strategic directives. And I firmly believe that that's true, and I find it hard to transition to a point where we don't at least annually kind of get comfortable with the fact that we're on track.
The person's always free to review the actual wording of the directive they choose to.
Sure.
But we don't know how performance is happening if
Yeah.
there's not a monitoring report.
And the consistency is kind of like out of sight, out of mind, if you're not reviewing it all the time.
Yeah.
We all get busy in other directions. Now, on the other part though, as you're seeing, every time we change those, we're asking senior management
Huge
to
amount of work.
change again. And earlier in this meeting, we had the discussion, where's our 3-year, 5-year plan? So if
And
you're
we're changing all
gonna keep
the time.
changing it on them, you're never gonna get that. So I think it'll balance out as they get more defined. I don't see us changing 7, let's say, a whole lot or whatever. They're still being defined.
Yeah.
Oh, there'll still be efforts as boards change.
As they change, sure.
But you have to have a majority of the board that
People
give
have to be-
consensus to
yeah.
change it, even look to change it. That's the way I understood it.
Yeah, I think people have to be cognizant of, maybe we've done a lot of changes this year.
It's been a lot.
Just structurally, as far as committees and everything else, we did a lot of changes. As far as SDs, we've done major changes that are changing the entire focus and the entire, view of what this utility is gonna be. And I think maybe, instead of trying to tweak, SD 7 right away or that kind of stuff, let's let management work on what we've done right now as far as the major changes. Give them a year or two to bring it through these strategic initiatives and everything. Have them work on that, rather than us say, oh no, by the way, I'm gonna change this right away. Let's give them a break and let them work. We've given them a lot of work to do in the past year. But at the same time, I'm not saying not looking at the SDs.
Yeah, that's different.
I think we should
You're talking about
still,
change general.
I'm talking about changes. I'm monitoring fine, but as far as bringing it back to committee and changing the SDs themselves, I say, let's give them a break as far as the major ones that we've already worked on this year.
Yeah, so 2 quick things. One is, if senior management feels that the monitoring process is overly burdensome, then I wanna know that. Right, like if you're gonna tell me every time we go through this process, but I'm under the assumption that it's like an annual performance review. It's a good opportunity to reflect back on how we're doing, so.
I think that they're probably hesitant to do that. But
Well, it's up to them to tell us.
I just probably pretty clear though, don't you think?
No, not necessarily. I mean, they're adults, they can tell us whether or not it's time. I don't think it is, but please speak up if you feel otherwise.
Well, I think in some respects, I think it's important for us to share what we're doing relative to SDs.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's the only way some of this information gets public in some respects. But let me take that back as a conversation with my senior team about what that may look like or any concerns or issues are around that. I will let you know it does take time to spend time to gather the data, gather the facts, gather the trends or whatever that may be. It just takes time. Some of it is readily available. Some of it is because of the SD. We are developing kind of what that database, will look like. So I'll take that back to my team and I'll get some feedback and I'll
report back to the governance committee?
Some of the time saving could be in committee too, right?
Could be.
Like governance just heard most of what Mark described a week ago and then we heard it again. So if there's a need for the committee to actually like provide guidance, direction and help with that refinement, great. But if not, then hey, we're gonna present this, everybody cool, here we go, we don't need to go through. I mean, that's an example of like how we can tighten up the process a little bit.
Well, Craig, under your scenario, I guess you say, for instance, have the presentation at the subcommittee meeting or have it at the Tuesday meeting?
No, I think it's good for the whole board to hear it.
Pardon?
I think it's good for the whole board to see it.
Sometimes it's good to postpone it to the Thursday meeting.
You know, a lot of this has to do with how can we as a board be more efficient too, so that we don't create, overburden management, and I think that's a discussion. I don't know who can help us with that. Whether or not Eric Douglas can help us with it, Scott, you can help us with it, something like that we're not overburdening management with extra stuff. How can we as a board be more efficient, I think.
I just got an idea on that. I mean, so just this last, what we just did, I stepped out obviously, because I'd already heard it. Maybe we had the conversation or had seen it, it's been sent to us. At some point, there's recommendation for no change, all right? Why didn't we just say throw it at this meeting, and why did we have to go on the governance committee on a simple report like this?
Except this is, I'm
Everyone
sorry,
should have heard it one
there are
time.
major changes.
Well, I suppose the
done.
committee can make a
Would've saved
recommendation,
us.
I suppose,
It would have saved all our time, it would have saved all our time, and everyone could have heard it at once. Now, if there's changes and it's, oh boy, this is difficult, we gotta figure it out. I could see, so you guys need some, senior management needs, with that chairman, maybe some discretion of, is this committee worthy? Or is it just this committee? Or we all heard it once, which I think is better anyway.
And
I
I think,
concur with that.
yeah, and I think that maybe what is maybe the differentiator there between a subcommittee and an all-committee meeting is if there is a known issue that needs to be discussed in a subcommittee that potentially would cause something to be considered not in compliance. That's maybe what would warrant a subcommittee discussion and then a duplicate discussion here.
If there's but it would be up to senior management with the chairman's,
Right.
like, yeah,
With the
let's
chair of
have
the
everyone, yeah, is that what you're saying? Yeah, I agree.
So back to the SDs and your comment, it's the most important thing we do, and I think it's a job that's incomplete if we do not have measures and monitor them. I think that's our duty, back to duty of whatever our duties are there, oversight, care, and the rest. I think that's inherent.
If it was our greatest responsibility, what did we do before we had these?
We did it
I
a
wonder
different
that
way,
often.
that doesn't mean that it wasn't being, well,
What
and if it wasn't being done,
for the
then.
SDs.
Let me ask one question. I think on the monitoring, I feel like there's consensus on the potential revisions that I just want to affirm what you described, which is really we're going to have those conversations on an annual basis at some sort of retreat like, right?
Correct. That would be the intention. We had it on August 29th. It would be to do that way again. I think by consolidating the refinement discussion into a one-time event that then tees up priorities is helpful. I also think that some of the feeling of burden around the SD discussions have been because of the commingling of those two discussions. To have a discussion around monitoring and refinement or trying to do those close to each other and doing all of those separately led to at least 30 different potential discussions. With regards to monitoring reports and doing those on a monthly basis, you have, or on an annual basis rather, you set up 15 report outs and then one broader discussion around the refinement. I think the benefit in the refinement discussion is it's very important as we think about the strategic planning, as we think about the 10-year perspective or 15 or 20-year perspective, the refinement discussion allows us on an annual basis to say, hey, those things we're bouncing against, do they still reflect the will and the desire of this board? And having that affirmation, I think, is foundational. I don't know that you can really be effective in strategic planning in a way that engages the board without having that touch point. And so I think it's really building and making that very intentional, and having that on an annual basis is important. Not only for the SDs, but for the broader strategic planning efforts of the organization.
And I think, following on what Tim said earlier, the idea that the monitoring reports on a bunch of them go pretty quickly, and then also we don't foresee any necessity for changes in language. I mean, we look at several of them, access to credit markets, reliability, safety. I mean, I see no particular need for updates in those. We have good metrics that are working and are directing us forward ongoing. So the number of times when there's going to be a necessity for a significant amount of effort for a revision seems like it's going to decrease into the future. Because again, after 5 years of implementation, it feels like lots of them are getting to a point where need for revision on an annual basis is going to move to 2, 3, 5 year timeline.
I think that's correct, Director Williams, but, and what I will add is that the only dynamic challenge in that is the election cycle. Because where we have been with new directors coming on board is how do you capture that essence, because it may or may not reflect the board that preceded it. And in 2020, we'll have an election and then we'll have more still. So it's how do you gather the consensus of the board around these particular direction, and that's very important. So.
I just have a procedural question.
Yeah.
We talked about maybe doing the presentation only in this meeting and not in the pre-committee meeting, but in the past, on these monitoring report action items, the action is that the governance committee recommends board approval. So that implies that the governance committee has at least reviewed this monitoring report prior to it being presented at this. So in that process, it looks like that we need to continue that two-step process for monitoring. So
I think from a timing.
unless we change that process.
Well, even keeping the process the same could be a discussion rather than a presentation.
Yeah, though, if you have a chairman of a committee, part of the reason being a chairman of the committee is to make a decision. Here's what we're gonna do, or here's what we're not gonna do. So we all kind of, so you get that. So I think there has to be some kind of filter there.
Sure.
I know what you're saying, but it's like.
We can change the process.
We all talk pretty much, I
Well,
say.
what's happened previously is that if there's not a pre-committee meeting, it's, Bo puts it online, the committee reviews it. If you agree with this, then we're gonna go ahead with this if there's no other discussion.
If I can add, I think that as you've seen, there's a brief out and there's a regular recurring pattern around kind of the committee meeting to prepare for committee meeting.
Yeah.
And I would say, I know that Director Yoder on Systems Committee is very good and intentional around floating through and saying, we do not need to discuss any of these particular things because they will be fully vetted out in this meeting. It feels to me, to everyone's point, that that's a good opportunity to submit something like an SDA to governance. And at that point, the chair of the governance committee could say, are there any challenges, questions, feedback on this, or can we just defer it to, and then it becomes a procedural thing. So I think we can take what everyone is saying and really enhance the process and procedure further to make it more efficient.
Well, we're very
This is very
fortunate
good
we have you helping do this. Seriously, this is a ton of work. I mean, that Scott, we all appreciate it because we know how much work you and your team put into it, and Mo too. There's a lot goes into it that we understand and we appreciate.
We don't understand how much they put into it.
Yeah, I know.
Thank you.
You're wrong.
I appreciate the discussion, Director.
And then we're gonna wait for the refinement until August.
So what is still on our list to potentially refine from the August meeting?
Oh, golly, I don't.
I think SD9 is
SD9.
one of them.
SD9, and there's a conversation on DL, SD9 and DL9 are the two that are open right now for discussion.
Thank you.
So we have one more item.
Committee, yeah.
We have one more item that we wanted to give you an update. Part of our commitment to give you an update on Power with Purpose was to give you the latest and greatest update on things that have been going on and any changes and any details around that. And I'm gonna turn it over to Mary to kind of step us through this first kind of update.
Okay, great. Thanks. So we're just gonna go through a little bit about the solar RFP. When you approved this on November 14th, on November 15th, we issued the RFP. We did say our time frame was short, and we're hopefully demonstrating that we were ready to go in anticipation of that approval. What I will go over today is about, a little bit about our essential reliability services. Our preferences around the RFP, some interconnection commitments or some interconnection requirements that we have, the sizes, the energy storage and where we're gonna go with that. What our options are for commercial operation dates, and then some contract structures. So I'll go a little bit into detail on each one of these. In terms of our facility, what we're really looking for is energy. So it's facility output over time, and it's measured in megawatt hours. Accredited capacity, which is the facility output, which do satisfy our SPP accreditation requirements. And then our essential reliability services, which is really defined by NERC, or North American Electric Reliability Corporation. And it includes ramping, balancing, voltage support, and frequency. So just a little bit to start off with how we're looking at these facilities. So in terms of project siting, we did make the determination that we do want the projects sited in the state of Nebraska. We do have a strong preference that they be in or near our system in order to be able to capitalize effectively on the resiliency benefits, and then to just enhance our essential reliability service capabilities. Projects that are proposed should be out of a floodplain. We've all had some experience with that over the last year. So we're really looking for that as a preference in this RFP. Sites, we do have a preference for ground cover solutions to support our environmental stewardship programs. And what our goals and options there, pollinator habitats, natural grasses, those sorts of things are what we're looking for. And then the project must have transmission interconnection, and we have a preference for 161 kV or 345 kV, but we will also accept 69 kV.
Mary, real quick, I think Director Bogner also raised a question about whether or not any of these sites would be prime farmland. And so in our RFP, we require each of the proposals to identify whether any of these projects are within any of the farmland classifications.
We did ask them to do that in the RFP.
Just identify, but not identify a preference one way or the other, right?
Right, that is correct.
Correct.
Project size, you approved 400 to 600 megawatts. We are looking for the proposals, multiple proposals, to be in the range of 50 to 250 megawatts. Courtney has talked a little bit about how the economies of scale start to diminish as you get over 200 to 250. And so while we'll accept something larger, that is something that we would be looking at going forward. We do expect that there will be multiple projects that we will obtain through this bid process, not just a single project. Around our energy storage capability, there is a requirement that they have the ability to install energy storage in the future. The energy storage technology is changing rapidly. As I said previously last month, that we really want to learn a lot about how that technology is evolving and what we think are the designs that we would like to bring into the system and test, and then what the long-term benefits are. So we're getting with some of our counterparts in the industry to try to understand some of this a little bit better than we do today. Our intention is to release the request for information sometime in the spring of next year. And then the proposals must include land and substation design so that it will support this integration of future energy storage into the capability of the solar assets that we acquire. Potential contract structures, our vendors have the opportunity to respond with different variety of structures. Purchase power arrangements with an option for us to purchase at a later date. Our own ownership, they can look at either purchase or ownership of the facilities constructed for sale to OPPD, or to come in with an engineer, procure, and construct for OPP. So different structures that they can look at and they can bid on going forward. So So we had a tentative timeline, I can tell you already, this has changed. So I was sort of chuckling when Scott used the term, this is dynamically changing, this is a dynamic process. That's what this is as well. We did issue on November 15th the RFP. We did have a pre-bid webinar. That was a short week. We did that on November 26th, the day before Thanksgiving. Some of the vendors did not have the opportunity to attend that webinar, and so that notice of intent to bid was originally set for December 6th. We've extended that out to give these vendors a little bit more time to take a look at our RFP and respond back. So we've extended out the vendor questions to go along with that. We are still anticipating that by the end of the year, we'll be done with all of the questions and that the proposals will be into us on January 22nd. So we've not extended that deadline. We're just allowing the vendors a little bit more time to really look at the RFP and ask their questions so we know whether or not they intend to bid.
And Mary, have you received questions yet, despite the change in timeline?
We have. The first one had 21 questions. The second one has an additional 10, should go out later this week, I believe. And so, yes, we are seeing a number of questions coming in. We also had a pretty large participation rate. In the webinar, we had 20 vendors, about 20-ish vendors, about 55 people that were actually on the line to listen to the webinar. To date, we have a total of 47 vendors that have signed or engaged in the RFP, and 37 of those have signed the non-disclosure agreements that we have.
Mary, can we add there in terms of, because I sat in on that, you guys did a beautiful job handling the confidentiality of it so that people didn't really know who else was on the line in that regard. So I thought that was excellent from supply chain as well as the team on that.
It's a great collaboration between many of the departments that you see represented here and really just fabulous support from all areas of the company. I started to say that 37 have requested the NDAs, 33 have signed those and executed them. So lots of interest in what we're doing.
Was that webinar recorded and available for people that weren't able to attend to?
I don't believe it's recorded.
It was not recorded, but the slides were provided.
Sorry, what was that?
It was not recorded, but the slides were sent out afterwards.
So just as a summary, what we've done to date is we've identified the project size. We've put that out anywhere between 50 and 250, although we will accept larger facilities if they are proposed. All the projects must be in Nebraska. We do have a preference for in our service territory and on our system in order to support the resiliency of the system. And we will consider floodplain, but we really have a preference not to be in a floodplain. 69, 161, or 345 kV transmission interconnection is required. PPA with buy option or ownership structures will also be looked at as we go forward. Commercial operations state, we're really looking to get a spread of those. 22 and 23 are both what we have as required, but we'll also look at 2024. So if they have longer term projects that they want to bring in, those are also acceptable to us.
So help me understand the timeline there, because we have some requirements in 2022 and 3 that we need to meet. So we would potentially look at some of the projects by that time to meet our requirements, and then if it were lower cost based on longer timeline, we would consider that for future acquisition. Is that about right?
It is. So we're putting in the requirement that they would have to be in commercial operation by May of 2022. What that does is it allows us to accredit them over the summer of 2022, as long as they're in commercial operation, or a commercial operation in 2023. So what we see is a ramping of the load that we see coming in order to meet that ramping rate. We're accepting projects in different years to be in alignment with what we see as the ramping that's coming in from our load from customers that at least they provided us today. So that's why we can do it over a span of years.
Great, thanks.
Okay. And then we do have plant design, where the inverters and the controllers are capable of providing those essential reliability services. That's one of the things that we've really been particularly interested in making sure that we bring in for the system going forward. The contract structure allows us to be able to make this a dispatchable unit, so that's another thing that we're looking at. And so we really have preferences for those sorts of things. And then, the ground cover is really the standard solutions that you have out there, but we're really making that a point in the RFP to make sure that we pay attention to that going forward. So just a little bit about where we are, what we've been doing for the last month, and just to kind of give you a peek inside as to what the progress has been. And with that, we'll take any questions. I have my phone of friends back here.
So you mentioned the January 22nd as the timeline for the proposals due, and then from the next few months calendar that Mo provided, there were updates. Are we expecting any kind of a update in January?
We'll provide a monthly update to the board. That update may say, all we have is we know that we got these many responses to our bid and we're evaluating those, but it may be more detailed like this. It just depends on the information that we have.
And if there's something that's emergent,
right,
it may show up in another communication to
Yeah.
you, and then we'll follow up at the next board meeting to do a public presentation of it.
So our intent is over the course of the next 6 to 9 months to be able to update you on a monthly basis.
But then following the receiving the proposals by January 22nd, there are additional timelines that we need to be meeting in order to respond back and make selection on those proposals. Is that something you can talk about now, or?
So the critical timeline is by April 30th, we have to have our interconnection request into the SPP for study. Our target right now is the first part of April to get that into them, maybe even the late part of March. What we need to do is we need to get through the evaluations after January 22nd of the solar facilities that we're interested in, run that through our model again, and that will help inform us about the gas assets.
Right.
Once we have both the solar and the gas assets and location of where we need, as well as size, then we can go ahead and put in the interconnection request and start to prepare the proposal, the RFP for the gas assets, now that we would know the size and location of those.
And so that was actually kind of what I was getting to was which monthly report do we expect to be the one which will have the size and location on the solar that would be available, because that leads into the gas, which needs to be by April 1st. Is that expected February, expected March? I mean,
So we
understanding
might,
it can change.
we could do that in closed session, but if we don't have the contracts negotiated, we certainly don't want to do that publicly. I can't tell you how long that's gonna take currently, because I'm not really sure whether there's gonna be 2, 3, or 4 different solar contracts. And so we'll just have to look at that and come back and let you know, we're thinking about X number of contracts and how long that'll be at that time.
But I'm certainly not opposed to going into closed session to give you the best information we have, right? So I think that's what the board would want.
Yeah.
And then for us to think about when those are finalized, to do more of a
Right.
public presentation around it. Now, you were giving me the
It was
eye.
just a comment. I'm just, go ahead and finish up.
I'm sorry, and my question was mostly when would it not be in closed session but in open session? And it sounds like by April for sure.
It'll depend on how many there are and how long it takes to negotiate those contracts. As soon as the contracts are negotiated, we'll certainly go into open session and release that information.
My comment relative to updates is that you get twice the number of opportunities to learn something if you're on the systems committee, I'm thinking. Just saying.
I'm mostly talking about the public side update because we'll have information, yes, but I think this is an item of great interest, and so I'm curious when that can be publicly available.
We'll do it as quickly as we can.
Great, thank you.
Just a point of clarification on that topic, there's a potential that contracts won't be fully signed before you submit to SPP.
Maybe not fully signed, but at least
Far down
completely
that path.
negotiated to where we are fairly certain that that's where we're gonna go. And again, we can in the SPP process, it allows us to put in what we think is coming, and we have periods of time in which we can refine that.
Thank you.
If the project isn't gonna come online until 2023 or 2024, that April 1st deadline doesn't
really
Oh,
apply, or it
we
does?
would really like to get it into that study as early as
Okay.
possible.
Because otherwise we have to wait
Another year before we can get
And
it.
that just gets you behind, well, we just can't get there.
Yeah.
You now have a sense for level of interest to the extent that you can share. Are you happy with the volume of vendors that are interested?
I'll ask Courtney to answer that.
I would say yes, and based on how we engaged, and we're still getting some calls, questions as people see it, so I think we're happy at this point.
But you'll see a drop off from those interested and those actually submitting.
Yeah. So that notice of intent to bid will give us more information of who's actually going to bid.
So just to give you a sense, I was in the airport at Midway on Sunday coming home with an OPPD shirt on, and I was stopped by two people in the airport that were with renewable companies. And then at my son's 30th birthday party in Manchester, there was also a vendor that was there who knew my son from Boston. And so it's a small world we live in. And he beelined to me and I just said, I have the number. Courtney, but that's, I mean, there is national interest around this, very clearly.
I don't think we have to worry about the stakeholders as far as that.
I always behave too, by the way. Always behave.
The process, what you just presented is not available publicly yet. Are we gonna plan to make?
No,
Yes,
this is public.
Well, it's not part of the meeting materials on the website.
Correct, the presentations will be posted after the conclusion of this meeting.
Thank you for that.
Thank you for that, Mo. And if there's no other comment, Scott?
Well, there's no other comments on this, but there is a new process that came out of governance committee regarding the review of
Oh,
the
yep,
board.
review of the consent agenda. Everyone can.
Sit down for everyone.
I'm happy.
I'm happy to, the last minute is tomorrow, but.
We would like it right now, as far as decreasing workload for our.
Just as a clarification point, Director Moody mentioned it earlier, consent agenda items are items that are intended to not have discussion.
Public or board, right?
Public or board.
Public or board. They are routine items that are intended to go through really without comment. If there's a desire to make a comment, allowing for that comment, creating space for that's important, and all I would do is require pulling it off the consent agenda, and there's no judgment as to whether it should be on the consent agenda or not. It's just important to have a general thought, are these the right items? What we would like to avoid are times like last month's board where a consent agenda item suddenly was being discussed for 45 minutes. It doesn't really allow for that, and it does not give a good signal to the public around what could be discussed in more detail at the board meeting, although technically speaking, even Thursday, there could be items pulled off of the consent agenda.
Yeah, Scott, one thing we forgot, or I forgot to ask, I guess, was, does that include the public speaking also?
That's correct, yeah, the consent agenda items would be intended to not have comment on them.
So, yeah,
So if we expect public,
so usually what I have done is.
Well, we
at
can
the end,
clarify that. I'm looking at the look of shock on
Well,
Director
well,
Moody's face.
Yeah, to clarify, what I have previously done, if there's consent, is there anyone in the public that would like to state anything on these consent?
So the intention will be to allow that,
Like that.
continue that.
I
Okay,
think we like it, even though other people don't do that,
so to clarify, consent agenda items, there would be no
Once again,
comment
we're
from
leading
board, and it would be open to public to make comment on those specific items if desired.
I like that.
Is that good?
We'll keep our mouth shut.
well, I would
But
say,
then it's not consent anymore. See, that's the problem.
It's a good balance.
That's a good balance.
We need to give the public that opportunity.
Give the public the opportunity and then we're quiet. We can talk about it after.
I think you've also done a really nice job if some members of the public are commenting on something else that you've directed them to say, hold off and talk about that at the end, so.
Yeah, because they get, sometimes they get confused with that too.
Last month was a good example.
Yeah.
So with regards to the current, or is that clear? There'll be no board comment on consent agenda items, or would be open for public on any of those items?
Mo, maybe you could help write some language for the beginning of the meeting on Thursday that we can clarify to the public in the room at the time through maybe something that someone is saying, that everybody understands the change. think that would be helpful.
And we'll put that on the website as well.
Yeah. And then the current consent agenda items are 5, 6, and 7. 5 being the approval of the October 2019 Comprehensive Financial and Operating Report, the November 2019 meeting minutes, and the December 12, 2019 agenda. 6 is the declaration of anticipated expenditures reimbursement resolution number 6352. And 7 is SD8 employee relations and monitoring report resolution number 6353. Are there any desire to pull any of those items off consent agenda? Hearing none, this will be the agenda until it's not.
It's dynamic, it's dynamic.
Shining person.
I have one.
Wait, Denise, no, we're still there, yes.
No, I just want to say that this diligent process is awesome. It works at 38,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean. And, because I could refresh it before I left and look at it on my way back, and so I was ready to go this morning, so.
Thank you. That's terrific.
But it does work, and it's very helpful to people who are traveling or living their life and yet wanting to stay engaged. So the diligent process where it doesn't require internet connection is very helpful. So thank you for that.
As long as you're not in airplane mode. I couldn't get my
I
books
couldn't get
because
mine
I was
either
still in airplane
when I was in
mode.
airplane mode. Yeah, I couldn't.
I did eventually, but couldn't figure out what was going on.
Airplane mode, yeah, you have to open it.
It's a different issue.
Okay, if that concludes our meeting, then thank you very much for everyone attending.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.